My name is Peter Lalla. I am the meeting is in progress. I'm the chair of the Little Hoover Commission. Thank you for joining us today, whether you are here with us in Sacramento or you're joining online. We have other commissioners that are with us, Vice Chair Sean Varner, Commissioners Dion Aroner, David Meyer, Cynthia Buiza, former Senator Anthony Cannella, former Senator Bill Emerson. I know that's the first time I've done that, but I thought it was time that we should recognize your legislative history, and Yana Sidley. Also with us today are the commission staff, Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, Project Manager Tristan Stein, and analysts Ashley Hurley and Rachel Medioli. Let's do some housekeeping before we begin talking about our subject. We'll break for lunch at noon. We'll reconvene at 1:15. The commission will hold its business meeting during lunch in this room. The business meeting is open to the public and you are welcome to attend if you wish. We are live streaming today's hearing on Zoom, and we will hear from live witnesses today remotely. The video and audio of our witnesses testifying remotely will be turned on when it is their opportunity to speak. We will have a public comment session at the end of the hearing. If you are here with us in person and you want to make a public comment, please fill out the public comment slip and give it to one of our staff members in the audience. Members of the public who have joined us online will be muted during the hearing. Those who wish to make a comment will be unmuted during the public comment session at the end of our hearing. If you want to make a public comment online, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join our public comment queue. Those of us who have joined by phone, you can send an email to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov, letting us know that you want to address the commission. That's on the screen presently. You must provide the phone number from which you are calling so that we know who to unmute. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and emails requesting comment during the duration of our hearing. As is usual at commission hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We're recording today's hearing, and after the hearing, staff will place a permanent link to the recording on our website and upload it to our YouTube channel. Now to the substance of today's hearing. This is the second in a series of commission hearings examining equitable economic development across California. These hearings are part of a commission study exploring how and why significant regional economic disparities have emerged in California and what can be done to address them. Our goal is to identify the best tools California can use to ensure that the state's poorest regions and the people who live there enjoy greater prosperity and opportunity. At our first hearing in Riverside, we learned from a statewide perspective on how California has taken steps to address regional economic disparities, specifically looking at the Regions Rise Together initiative. We also examined the Inland Empire's experience in building partnerships among key stakeholders with the goal of promoting inclusive regional growth. Today, we will further this conversation as we explore additional approaches taken on both the state and local levels to spur equitable regional development. Today's hearing will include a morning and an afternoon session. During the morning session, we'll hear testimony on current state efforts to encourage inclusive and sustainable regional development, especially through the Community Economic Resilience Fund. In addition, we'll consider how the state can improve coordination among programs that could support more equitable economic growth. The afternoon session will focus on the Fresno Merced Future of Food and Innovation Initiative, a cross-sector partnership that aims to drive both economic growth and equity by making Central Valley agriculture more innovative, inclusive, and sustainable. This initiative also provides an example of the kind of project the Community Economic Resilience Fund could support. I want to thank Commissioners Emerson and Garcetti for serving on the subcommittee for this study and their leadership on this crucial topic. And with that, I'd ask Executive Director Ethan Rarick to please introduce our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had planned to begin the morning session with 4 witnesses. 2 of them, unfortunately, are delayed due to a delayed Amtrak train, and they are on their way now and will be here shortly, including Egon Terplan, who had planned to be the first witness today. So I want to thank the 2 witnesses we're going to start with for their willingness to go first and to be flexible in adjusting their presentation. When Mr. Terplan and Ms. Collins arrive, we'll then take their testimony. So first, however, we will begin with Derek Kirk and Kimberlee Meyer. Derek Kirk currently serves as Community-Based Solutions Supervisor for the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. In this capacity, he is responsible for supporting businesses interested in coming to, expanding, or staying in California. He also supports communities in their journeys to becoming equitable places for all their residents. His past roles include Director of Community Engagement and Advocacy for Visit Slow Cal and President and CEO for the Atascadero Chamber of Commerce. He will be followed by Kimberlee Meyer. She is Chief of the Workforce Services Central Office Division at the Employment Development Department, where she is responsible for administrative oversight and guidance to local workforce development areas and partners, and for support of field divisions on programs administered by the Workforce Services branch. She has served the workforce system for the past 13 years in diverse roles. So we'll begin first with Mr. Kirk and then Ms. Meyer, and then we'll follow with the other 2 witnesses when they arrive. Mr. Kirk.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. It's an honor to be with you this morning and a privilege to have the opportunity to share a bit about the work that the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency, and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research are doing collaboratively together. We're pivoting a little bit to talk more holistically, as Director Eric mentioned. Both senior advisors, Terplan and Mary Collins, are on their way and will provide some additional context. I want to start briefly by talking about the reality of the picture and the state of play here in California and the position that we're currently in. As you have heard from previous hearings, in 2019, as the governor was sworn in, he launched the Regions Rise Together initiative with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GOBIZ, and OPR, to really consider opportunities and better understand the state of play in inland parts of California. That initiative hosted opportunities and gatherings throughout the Central Valley and the North State and in the Inland Empire to develop a better understanding on being on the other side and not being in government at that time. It was really exciting to see. I grew up in Tulare County in the city of Porterville, and it was really exciting to see the state paying attention to inland parts of California and trying to develop an understanding of how to invest in those places. And since that point, you've obviously heard from the folks around Fresno Drive and some in the Inland Empire, learning about the partnerships that they've developed and how they can expand and experience new opportunities of doing work and business together as we consider growing together. And so I want to start by just talking a little bit about the reality of how we are looking at the state, how our interagency partnership is looking at the state. And if staff can put that region slide, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the regions that we are working off of through our interagency partnership. Mary's going to talk more when she gets here about the development of SURF overall, but I just kind of want to lay the landscape here in these 13 economic regions. And start by saying there are probably hundreds of geographic maps that the state of California has and local partners have historically used to be able to determine ultimately what regions look like across our state. This map is not perfect, and our interagency team is absolutely willing to admit that. But as we look at the opportunities and considered both data from the LMID team at EDD and our transportation partnerships, as well as existing economic development partnerships, this is ultimately the map that was established to divide the state into 13 specific regions to start building partnerships. One thing I like to say is that this map and the dark lines that determine the regions don't mean that individuals and businesses and economies stop at the line and say, it's nice to see you on the other side, and wave and don't interact at all. We recognize that these regions, for example, the Central San Joaquin Valley, inclusive of North San Joaquin, Central San Joaquin, and Kern, have deep ties together. And again, deep ties to the Bay Area and Los Angeles County and many other regions. And so this map was developed as an opportunity for our three agencies to come together to consider ways in which we can invest in equitable economic development. Yes, ma'am.
You probably don't know this, and maybe it's more for a staff question. Sorry to interrupt, but
It's okay.
do you know if this map at all represents the like South Coast, the air quality management districts? Are they overlapped? Are they similar?
There are many similar maps. The transportation, the MPO map is also very similar to this. There are a couple of shifts. You'll notice things like Ventura County was pulled into the Central Coast rather than sitting with Los Angeles County. Or if you look at LMID data or labor flows, Alpine County would have been in Greater Sacramento, but we know that they do economic development planning with the 5 counties in the Central Sierra region. So yeah, of course, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So this map is the way in which we are considering investment through the SURF program and how we can consider opportunities to build collaborations and partnerships. I'll talk a little bit more about this as well towards the end of our discussion, but we're also providing a staff person based in each of these regions. It's the first time that we've considered opportunities to hire a local individual to serve as a regional economic recovery coordinator. And we will, again, I'll talk a little bit about that. But this is the map. I just wanted to frame our discussion that we're considering. Again, not perfect, lots of opportunity to do cross-regional collaboration. We know that many of our regions will find opportunities to discuss further. And yet this also provides us a little bit lower on the funnel perspective, if you will. Many of these regions will say that agriculture, for example, is a priority, but we know that agriculture in the North State looks different than agriculture in Fresno. And we can hone in and look at specific industry opportunities in each of those places. So I think collectively, we'll start to talk a little bit about the SURF program as it was established. The governor signed SB 162 into law last year, which established the Community Economic Resilience Fund, a really incredible opportunity for us to work together. The legislation itself requires the development of an interagency team between GoBiz, LWDA, and OPR. And we're really thrilled to have Secretary Pelugii, Director Myers, and Director Acefa participating directly in those conversations and guiding the discussion for us as we consider the development of this program. SB 162 was originally appropriated $600 million from the American Rescue Plan Act that the state was receiving in those stimulus funds. As the U.S. Department of Treasury rolled out their guidelines for the use of those funds, the governor and the legislature ultimately shifted what funds were where, and our program is now fully funded by state general fund dollars for the full $600 million. So we have a little more flexibility, a little more opportunity there. Go ahead.
Can you, Commissioner Buizer, can you turn on your microphone for the purposes of the Zoom? Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot. I'm just curious for the current budget cycle. Do you know what's going to be in there for SURF?
The current budget, as it's being negotiated for the next fiscal year, doesn't have additional funding for SURF at this time. We think that there's a unique opportunity to consider how we develop the infrastructure and how we ensure that we're investing into the program efficiently. The SB 162 provides our friends at the at EDD through LWDA through essentially, I think, the end of 2026 to encumber and expense those funds. So we have a few more budget cycles to understand ultimately the priorities that are established by the regions themselves before we get into potential opportunities for additional reinvestment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Can I follow up on that?
Absolutely.
So I understand that there's planning dollars allocated, $5 million for each district. Is that funded? Has that been deployed or is that funded because in the budget, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the full $600 million has been appropriated for the program. EDD currently has an active solicitation to seeking out organizations to apply to be what we've called the regional conveners in each of the 13 territories. That application is due July 25th, and we'll work through the competitive scoring process at that time. So that money is appropriated, but has not been allocated to the regions themselves. So SURF is really a one of a kind and a unique opportunity for us to consider these types of investments. So when we talk about the establishment of SURF, we've divided the program into ultimately two phases. The first phase being the planning phase, where each region will receive $5 million in economic planning. I'd like to clarify that economic planning doesn't mean environmental planning or permit and environmental documents. It means strategic planning and capacity building. And Kimberlee can talk more about the specifics of what's included in the SFP. The second phase ultimately includes a little under $500 million for implementation work. And there are not guidelines currently developed for the implementation process yet, other than to say that the legislation defines it as a rolling and competitive process. And so we will begin this fall determining ultimately what the guidelines should look like for that. But Kimberlee, do you mind if I turn it to you to talk more specific about the planning grants?
Yeah, let me just say to our witnesses, what you've already discovered is that this is a pretty active
Sure.
commission. And I always tell the witness, I neglected to tell you when you first sat down, is that when you're interrupted, you should be complimented. Feel complimented that the commissioners have looked at the material. You've said something that triggers an interest and a comment, and we have another commissioner who wants to pose a question. So I see David, Commissioner Meyer. You would, if somebody would, there he is. I heard him. I heard something.
Yeah.
He did. Commissioner Meyer, if you can turn on your video, please, we will be able to see. There you are.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you to the witnesses. I was out earlier today trying to learn how to play golf. And I discovered that when you get on the green at the golf course, you need to know where the pin is. And so my question really relates to how can you do planning when you don't know how much money is available? In other words, $5 million sounds like a lot of money for planning, but if you don't know whether the 500 million is going to be spread out like peanut butter on a sandwich and just prorated between the 13 regions, how can you really scale what your plan is for without having some guidance about what the process looks like or what the endpoint is? Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Meyer, I really appreciate that question. To be completely frank, $500 million could be invested in one of these 13 regions, and we likely wouldn't fully fund all of the investment priorities that they develop through the planning process. The uniqueness of where we are at this point is that the nature of the unprecedented budget surplus that California has had and the governor and the legislature's commitment to investing in broad-based community and economic development projects. We also have developed some really fabulous and unique partnerships with several federal agencies, including the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the U.S. Department of Commerce, specifically the Economic Development Administration. It is our intent to provide technical assistance to the regional conveners and the high road transition collaboratives that are funded by the $5 million planning grants and connect the dots for and with them to other funding mechanisms. I often use the analogy of broadband, right? Broadband, last year, the governor signed into law $6 billion worth of investments in broadband deployment and adoption in California. That we don't necessarily need to use the $500 million for SURF to fund broadband projects. We do owe it to our communities to help connect the dots for them and bring in partners like the California Department of Technology or the Public Utilities Commission, as well as the federal government and agencies, again, like the USDA who have broadband dollars. We imagine that the little less than 500 million for implementation is more of an initial investment, I would say, in some of these projects. And we have really vast opportunities to connect to other dollars and resources.
Well, just a follow-up question. What's the process amongst members of the governor's cabinet in making decisions about the $500 million? Is there a time frame? Are there criteria for deciding? Is it an allocation based on population, on the merit of the proposals? Is there a cap? Who's going to decide, and how is that process going to work?
Yeah, Commissioner, we have yet to develop the guidelines for the implementation phase of this process. Again, Secretary Pelugii and Directors Myers and Acefa are directly engaged in this process, as well as the staff that are testifying before you today and individuals like Undersecretary Stuart Knox at the Labor Agency. So guidelines will be developed. But Kimberlee, you want to talk about the process with which you all score applications in general?
Well, yes, thank you very much, Kimberlee Meyer. I also want to state that although the guidelines are not currently developed, the guidelines will be developed while the planning phase is still happening. Well, welcome. And so what is important to understand is that we will be doing outreach. We'll be looking at stakeholders and really talking about that implementation and what that means, which will allow those that are planning to really have a conversation about what their plans are looking like and give them a better idea. Please note that the planning grants are a 12 to 18 months, 24-month grant. Implementation grants, that information will start to come out in the winter of 2023. So there will be some time during their planning to get more information about implementation, how that money is going to be set aside of the 500 million. And what we're looking at, I think everyone will know, we have LMID, the Labor Market Information Division at EDD, to assist us, as well as looking at overall our 13 regions and how they are comprised, because ultimately we want to make sure that there's equitable access to funding and that those that are prepared and ready to go will not have the opportunity to take all the 500 million and leave those out that need a little bit more time in planning. So there are thoughts around all of that to make sure that when we do finalize how that funding will go out, that it's representative of all.
This is a super dumb question, but while you were talking, I went to your website. How does one apply? How would even one, because there's nothing on here for active RFPs or applications or anything like that. So how would someone even know to work with you?
So our solicitation for, thank you very much for that question. Our solicitation for proposal was released through EDD's internal, what we call an information notice, and is located on our EDD website under our solicitations location, as well as, I believe I'll have to ask Mary, is linked to the OPR.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if I might introduce the other two witnesses who have just arrived and then allow them to speak. They were actually going to speak first, and I will try to introduce them slowly because I think they literally ran here from the train station. So we'll let them catch their breath for just a moment. So we've now been joined by Egon Terplan and Mary Collins. Mr. Terplan is a senior advisor for economic development and transportation at the Governor's Strategic Growth Council and is helping lead the Regions Rise Together initiative. He is also an adjunct instructor at both Stanford University and the University of San Francisco, where he teaches courses in urban and regional planning. Prior to joining the governor's office, he was the regional planning director at the urban policy think tank SPUR, where he led dozens of projects on the intersections of economic development, regional planning, workforce preparation, land use, transportation, and governance. We're also joined by Mary Collins, who is a senior advisor for climate and economy at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Prior to joining OPR, she was the managing director for the American Jobs Project, a nonprofit think tank founded by Jennifer Granholm that focused on place-based economic development strategies to decarbonize our economy. She was a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley, worked on the U.S.-Mexico binational laboratory, and most recently was a policy advisor to the Norwegian government and served as a climate attaché for COP26. So let me turn to them.
Let me suggest something. First of all, thank you. And by way of explanation, your train was delayed because there's a fire somewhere between where you got on and where you got off. So I think everybody should understand that you're here because of things that were beyond your control. Secondly, you should know that Kimberlee and Derek were doing an outstanding job presenting the information. They have prompted a great number of questions from the commission. And it is our normal practice that when witnesses are testifying, if commissioners are sparked with a comment or a question, they may very well interrupt you. And you should consider that a compliment because they've taken such interest in what it is that you are presenting. And I know you want, why don't we continue with these two folks because there's a certain flow to that. And I thought that there were some questions by commissioners to our witnesses.
I just want to make a comment more than anything. You talked about the implementation, and this whole study we're doing is on equitable economic development. And when I look at the 13 regions, I'm from the Inland Empire, and so I'm very passionate about equitable funding there and the historical disparities over the last 30 years there with the population growth. So I want to ensure that this implementation process really takes into consideration some of the historical funding challenges that have been in those regions. I think the Inland Empire is progressing, but there are regions that are noted here that may not have the same resources as the coastal regions, LA and San Francisco's. And so they may not get their funding. They might not be as sophisticated, might need some help with implementation. I hope that that goes into the process of determining where the funding goes in the implementation of projects.
Yeah, Vice Chairman, thank you for that statement. I'm going to talk a little bit, I think, about GoBiz and the work that we're doing ultimately to consider opportunities for long-term sustainability of these investments, and then we'll look to Mary and Egon to talk more specifically about SERV. So as you may know, the mission of GoBiz is to serve as the state of California's leader for job growth, economic development, and business assistance efforts. Ultimately, we help companies, communities, and people. In the fall of 2021, thanks to a deep-rooted partnership with the U.S. Economic Development Administration, GoBiz received 2 EDA grants, one from the CARES Act and one from the American Rescue Plan Act at the federal level. These awards were made shortly after the governor signed SB 162 establishing SERF, and we're using a little over $2.5 million in total to support our engagement in SERF. And so we're grateful to the federal government for that. So this investment is allowing us to hire a regional economic recovery coordinator in each of the 13 economic regions that we mentioned on the screen. The coordinators are ultimately responsible for living and working in their regions and will be the technical assistance providers to their respective regional conveners as they're awarded through EDD and the high road transition collaboratives that they support.
I'm sorry to interrupt you just real quickly. How is that regional coordinator selected for the region?
The regional coordinator is a civil servant on my team at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, different than the regional convener that's awarded through a competitive process. And so I actually just brought on an individual that lives in San Bernardino and has served as a field representative for Assemblymember Medina's office for a number of years. He's joined our team. His name's Aaron Dill in the Inland Empire. And Aaron is responsible, just as many of you likely already have coordinators in your region. They're responsible for 2 primary foci, if you will, and this will get to the point of your statement. One, building a diverse and well-connected network of stakeholders. We know that many regions have already started. Inland Empire has several partnerships, though in 2 incredibly vast geographies and counties in San Bernardino and Riverside counties. So some additional opportunities to bring people up. Opportunities to bring people into the conversation that haven't had capacity or an understanding of what economic development is, though they should be involved in the process. I often tell my team that one day we'll be standing in front of grocery stores asking parents and individuals, what kind of jobs do you want to have in the future? Not that we believe you are the economic development experts in your region, but you should and do have a voice in your economy and their growth. The second focus is connecting the resources from both the state and federal government to these new collaboratives. Their job is to sit at the table with these conveners and these collaboratives as they're funded and start connecting the dots to all of the other funding mechanisms across the state. We know that some of the metro areas have organizations and resources to do those types of things. And we know that there are those like Inland Empire, where you are from, or Central San Joaquin, where I am from, that need that expert, that person who's doing nothing but mapping out the resources against your priorities and hoping to connect the dots, and in some cases, potentially even applying for grants. And so greater than implementation, that's kind of our thought process.
Have you given some thought also to other funding resources? I know the Inland Empire, using that as an example, has been critically underfunded by private foundations, and the private foundations know that and are looking to deploy funds in that area. As well as I know that there's businesses out there, big business, larger business like Amazon's invested billions of dollars in the Inland Empire, but are there small businesses that could contribute to supply chains types of things, and maybe getting those larger businesses at the table as well to have them invest in not just in themselves, but in smaller businesses in the communities?
Yeah, it looks like Mr. Terplan just can't wait to get his finger on the green button.
Well, good morning, commissioners. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, Egon Terplan, Senior Advisor, and I have some additional remarks, but just to your question about philanthropy, it's one of the points I was going to address, that in Regions Rise Together, one of the core goals that we have was actually to shift some of the philanthropic investment more to inland California. And happy to report, I think that's one of the successes that we saw at that initiative, of really getting some of the major foundations to look at their historic funding and to identify opportunities in inland areas. And so I think the Inland Empire has been a recipient of that. I don't know if Derek wants to address the small business point, but that's been one of the outcomes.
Yeah, thanks, Egon. I think to the point that the collaboratives themselves that are established will be required to have a really vast and diverse network of stakeholders that are participating. Business has to be one of those. And the director of the Office of the Small Business Advocate at GoBiz, Terralyn Gray, and I were just talking this week about how to build additional opportunities for small businesses to connect the dots and participate in these planning conversations. I think that will be a really critical component of the success as we consider where those look. I think what we will see coming from the planning phase of the SURF monies is a list, if you will, of investment priorities and projects from each of the regions. I think that there's a unique opportunity at that point for us to look not only to state and federal agencies, but also to our philanthropic partners and, quite frankly, private investors and businesses to say, how can you partner with this collaborative and with your community to make investments in these different types of projects, right? We want to shift away from looking at broad scale investments that we think might work for the regions and look at the opportunity to specifically target dollars to what the regions are telling us they need and those projects that obviously align with the state values like climate change mitigation.
I'm sorry to monopolize a little bit, but also it just made me think, and I know that I'm stating the obvious, but just to put it out there, is from advanced technology perspective involving universities that are in those regions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say to the Southern Border and Inland Empire regions in particular, there's been some really interesting partnerships developed both around the sustainability of the supply chain as well as Lithium Valley. So partners like CSU San Bernardino, UC Riverside, San Diego State, and others are work collaboratively coming together and realizing and recognizing opportunities to build not just research components, though that is critical, but regional opportunities for collaboration, right? How do you ensure that the research that's being done in our public and private universities gets out into industry and gets out into community and ultimately impacts change?
Yeah, Ms. Collins, you seem to want to contribute something.
I was just going to underline what Derek is saying, and that connection to the innovation ecosystem, to our universities, our incubators, our accelerators. Those are one of the key drivers to create good paying jobs, and that's one of the guiding frameworks of this whole program, is to create good paying jobs and increase access to those jobs, especially for communities that haven't had them before. So just wanted to kind of emphasize that what Derek was saying there.
Ms. Meyer, did you have an opportunity to finish the topic that you were talking about before we jumped all over it?
I don't even know. I will be more than happy to make sure we share the link as well. And we did utilize social media through OPRs to put out the solicitation itself. We had over 200 attendees in our informational webinar to launch the planning phase solicitation. And then we did ask. Okay. Oh, that's okay. Thank you for the feedback. No, thank you for the feedback.
Commissioner Sidley, is your mic on? I'm told it might not be.
It isn't, but I'm
Okay.
so loud and obnoxious that I didn't.
For the Zoom meeting, they cannot hear you. For the people
Oh.
watching on Zoom, they cannot hear you if you're
Got
on
it.
mic.
But honestly, I mean, I'm thrilled that you're all here and I appreciate what you're all doing. And I certainly want to hear the rest of the testimony, so I'll be quiet. But I was, as you were talking, I'm like, oh, a solicitation, let's see. And I couldn't find it. So that's it. And a shout out to what you're doing with Dee Dee Myers, old friend. I mean, phenomenal leader, and what you guys are doing, I think, is extraordinary. But now I'll be quiet and listen.
Senator Cannella, I think, has something.
Yeah, just a quick question. Things are moving fast. I'm trying to keep track of what's happening here. But so on the 13 regions, does each region currently have a liaison that is planted in that region?
We have 7 of 13 fully staffed. We also have 3 regional managers, one in Northern, Central, and Southern, that's filling in the gaps as we look to onboard the final 6.
Okay, does the one that includes like Stanislaus and Merced, do you have anybody in that region yet?
We don't have anyone in that region yet. We have in the Central San Joaquin Valley, we have representatives in Central San Joaquin and Kern, and just recently hired a Central California manager that will work directly with us. to
So when
support
that
region.
person is hired and put in that position, how are they going to reach out to the various stakeholders? Because, obviously these are big regions geographically and population wise, and we want to make sure that they're connected with the right people, not necessarily the loudest person, but
Sure.
the right people so that we can actually make some headway.
Yeah, so we have some really fabulous existing partnerships across the state GoBiz has in general. The very first task that I assign our team to do is map out the stakeholders that are in their region on a spreadsheet, quite frankly, start researching who are the community college partners and the university partners and the economic development and city and local government. Who are those partners? I sit with them to map out ultimately the existing partnerships that we know we have. We rely on our friends at both OPR and the labor agency to help us connect the dots on some of those spaces. And then they start scheduling meetings. So it's been fairly comprehensive. The staff so far have developed some partnerships that with organizations that I quite frankly did not know existed, and we've been able to have a lot of success in getting them out there. It's quite frankly the first time in over a decade that our office has had representatives, or that GoBiz has had representatives across the state, rather than having a staff fully based here in Sacramento. And so our communities are eager and very willing to build those relationships.
Well, I think it's a great idea. And obviously we're not elected officials, but we care about our communities. If we
Absolutely.
could just, when you place people in these regions, if there's some way to let us know who those are so we can maybe help connect them as well, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator.
Commissioner Meyer has raised his hand.
At the risk of sounding like Commissioner Varner, who has correctly educated all of us about realignment, the Little Hoover Commission staff did a very good job of outlining a variety of programs, a couple of dozen state programs, and I'm sure the same could be said of federal programs. In order to get to scale, how are the regions supposed to be guided about the intersection and potential combination of their plan that's going to be submitted to the state under this $500 million program, along with other reforms, other realignment or state programs or federal programs, which could be additive? That seems like a complicated task. And unless the regions who are contemplating submitting proposals have guidance from you all, they will be disadvantaged because they're not going to knit together all the programs that are available. And it seems like there's a technological opportunity to put on a website criteria for the plans that integrate these other programs, state and federal. Maybe you can comment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Commissioner Meyer. I'm going to answer part of your question and then look to Mary to talk specifically about what's inclusive in the plan. But ultimately, I will say that as we look to connect to the dots, that the legislation as it sits requires interaction and engagement with the SURF program to housing, transportation, broadband, natural resources, and energy development, which connects a really unique group of state agencies. A couple of the agencies that have already looked to partner with us on these programs include the Natural Resources Agency and the Departments of Water Resources and Conservation, as well as the Department of Food and Ag and the Department of Conservation. They're seeing unique opportunities to tie back into the collaboratives that we're supporting and look to the visions that those collaboratives will ultimately be casting for their regions and through these plans. We will be boots on the ground to start connecting them to the dots. We're at the process of, just like we're asking the regions to develop collaboratives, we're building the same collaboratives with our state agencies and our federal partners, bringing them into weekly conversations on what the regions are doing and ultimately how we're providing assistance in that way. One caveat before I hand to Mary, that the guidelines that were established for the SURF planning process are inclusive of the guidelines that the U.S. Economic Development Administration lays out for their comprehensive economic development strategies, or CEDS. And so at the end of the day, any of the counties across the state could adopt the regional plan as their CEDS and become eligible for U.S. EDA funding. And so we're trying to find some of the levers like that with which make the communities more eligible for funding.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Commissioner. And this is one of the opportunities and challenges that we've seen in putting this program together, that there's this windfall of investments from not only the state, but the federal level. And one of our key objectives, especially as we move from planning into implementation, is to help align and connect regions to all of these different resources that are coming down. There's things like broadband and infrastructure, workforce development, and even working in state government. Sometimes it's hard to understand the whole breadth of the investments that are happening right now. And so that's, as Derek mentioned, one of the things that we're working on, working with our different agencies. And as we move from these plans to implementation, really making those connections, not only to the different programs that are out there and funding opportunities, but as came up earlier with philanthropy, with private capital. And so that's one of the key objectives of the program. And so we are acting on that to prepare for the planning phase, to make sure that there are opportunities for these different tables to see the breadth of different programs and ensure that they're connected to them as we're thinking about turning these regional visions into action.
I can just make a quick comment. I appreciate Commissioner Meyer hinting at using SURF to revisit the 1991 realignment, but that's kind of a joke between us. But in all seriousness, you indicated some of the metrics of this, of what SURF can address. And I'm just curious why other areas are not included in this, like healthcare, for instance, which is part of the realignment. But why is healthcare not part of something to be addressed within the SURF funding?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the SURF program, it was created to promote a sustainable and equitable recovery from the economic distress of COVID-19 by supporting new plans and strategies to diversify regional economies and foster long-term economic resilience in the transition to a carbon neutral economy. And so one of the big frames that we have and big goals is creating good jobs and access to them as our economy changes and transitions. And so, we think about what is the comparative advantage of each region? Because I think, as my colleague Egon is going to speak about how economies really happen at the regional level, especially all these drivers that contribute to good paying jobs. We want to make sure that's one of the key focus areas of this program. A lot of things relate to economic development, to quality of life, but we want to ensure that there is focus on job creation, because if there is no opportunity for people to bring income into their families, that's going to impact other things, other health and other challenges that families might see day to day.
Yeah, if I might, and I think after I make a comment or a question, I'm going to turn to Mr. Terplan, because I understand that you have a presentation. But one of the things I'm encouraged by is having some familiarity with the nonprofit world. Often what happens is they lack the capacity to understand where to even go, or they don't have the resources to hire somebody to write a grant application, or they are unfamiliar with opportunities for additional sources of money for them. And so I think what you have identified is, in a way, the institutionalization of someone who will be responsible in the region for providing that kind of technical assistance by harvesting the different sources of resources that can be put to use. And so if you look at the 500 million after the planning money, it's almost, in a way, seed money so that people in your regions understand that it's the beginning of, it isn't the end of. So to not expect that the state of California every year is going to identify $500 million to put in a particular pot, but that money, your whole notion is to leverage that to additional money. And I think as that's carried out, it's going to have a real impact because for folks in those communities to have, in the organizations, to come to recognize that there is an individual from the state of California that they can ask questions of, okay? Once you make that connection and you cement that relationship, which is different from the convener. The convener's got a different job altogether. So in a way, you have a convener who is harvesting groups and people to come together to try to share a vision. And then you have the representative, the example that you hired from Assemblymember Medina's office, who's almost a technocrat in finding the stuff, okay? Go get the money, identify the sources of it, whether it be philanthropy or other government programs. So I think that's a wise approach to creating some longevity. And, the sustainability is so overused, like transparency. I'm beginning to dislike the terms, but that's an important part of what you're doing. What I'm curious about, and it is a question that often we ask with respect to programs and as they progress, do you have, and you see here's again, do you have, I have no idea who the you is. What are the reporting responsibilities? At what point is somebody's name going on the bottom of a report to either the governor's office or the legislature to say, here's what we've accomplished so far. Here's the groups that we've pulled together as conveners. Here's the sources of revenue that we've identified as those that have been hired through your offices. And because if there isn't a responsibility where someone is worried that, I've got a deadline of July 2023 by which I have to put together the report to present to somebody to show what it is that we've accomplished, those things tend to just sort of fritter away. And in fairness to EDD, right, you guys get a really bad rap because of some things that have happened in the past. And I don't think the public appreciates and understands the extent of services provided by EDD. And so, thank you for being here and for the services that you do give to people that most people don't know anything about.
Well, thank you, Chairman. And I think I will go ahead and start on that answer. And if Mary wants to jump in, she can. So EDD is the administrative oversight and function. And so they will be ultimately responsible to make sure that we have our legislative report, which the first one is to go in December and then June every year after that. But as I want to say, it's a collaboration. This team right here meets on a weekly basis and collaborates via email and phone way more than that during the week to make sure that what we are looking at and what we're doing is really driving the focus of SURF. So although EDD is administratively, yes, my name, or actually Secretary Pelusia's name, and Undersecretary Knox, but we are responsible for that. And we're responsible to make sure within our solicitations that we write, both for planning and implementation, that those that are getting those funds understand their responsibility to make sure that they're collecting the information and reporting to us. In addition, we are, through the legislation as a requirement, we are hiring a third-party evaluator. That evaluator is going to be a technical assistance and evaluator and more of a developmental evaluation as well as research to work in partnership with the EDD team. Derek has he's looking for his 13, but I will also have staff that are dedicated to the SURF project, and OPR will as well. So we will have a team of 3 that's introduced to each of those planning grants as their no wrong door type function to make sure that no matter what question they're asking, we can reach out between our expertise and our expertise of our stakeholders and partners to assist them. So that third-party evaluator will also help us define metrics, outcomes, looking at how the planning went and how we need to look at the implementation grants and what is considered success. As Mary stated, we're looking for job creation, job quality, workforce, how to build that all together, because we know in the end, it takes a village for the economy, and it's not just about just the businesses, but the employees for those businesses, and really mapping the governor's budget as well as the federal budget that EDD gets puts a lot of dollars into workforce services and employment. And so we want to make sure that those planning agencies are really implementing those other funds available to them, as Derek said, to make sure that we can cross and use our funding to its fullest. And so I think the one thing, like you said, this 500 million is not the end all. It really is a seed to start thinking and really working in this collaborative manner. And as I say, this team right here, as Mary would have said in her speech when she started off, because we were teeing up, that, it's about building an inclusive planning table, but we have to show it from the top. And this is the inclusive planning table we have, but it's more than the 4 of us and it's more than the staff we have. It's our stakeholders, our partners, and those that work in it. So I think it's really important that, we all bring our own expertise to the table. As EDD, I'm the administrative function. I said my talking points are really going to be boring: oversight, monitoring, reporting, all of that. And Derek, Egon, and Meyer are all about the engagement and all that. But in the end, all of it is needed to have a successful project. And so my team works really hard to get the vision out, but stay within our guidelines and keep the guardrails up to make sure that we have fiscal stewardship, as well as that we meet our goals and our plans, and that we score and we invest in the right opportunities. And so, this table looks through the project with multiple lenses. And so I'm just excited to be part of this project and really see where it goes. And I think there's more to come just within the funding that we can braid.
All right, before Vice Chair Varner has his question, you should know that this commission would never find talking points about process, evaluation, and metrics boring. All right, that is what my experience is, too often those are the things that are missing. And as a former legislator, I can understand why sometimes people don't want that stuff, because if there's nothing to be held account for, you can't be held accountable, and it makes it kind of easy. Anyway, question.
I think what you said is critically important, and I want to sort of reiterate what Chairman Nava said. I really appreciate the fact that you've allocated funds for planning, because I think that differentiates planning from implementation, and that the auditing of the outcomes, the high wage job creation is so critical to this. And I know that we had a study a few years ago on Prop 63 and the accountability of the funds going into counties on that. But from this regional perspective, auditing what are the outcomes, and are the implementation dollars are going directly into these programs, and instead of studying and writing reports and sending it up to the state. I think it's critically important to differentiate the planning from implementation. So I really appreciate the fact that you had the foresight to do that.
So how about we have two witnesses who are supposed to be launching the presentation. Let me turn this over to Mr. Terplan.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners, for being here. Egon Terplan, as I was introduced, we're going to go a little bit back in time and kind of conceptually, and then work through, and I think kind of can weave in a little bit. I'm, as the introduction was made, Senior Advisor focused on economic development and transportation. And actually, I joined the administration 3 years ago specifically to work with Lenny Mendonça and Kate Gordon to launch what we came up with as the phrase "Regions Rise Together," actually inspired by some people in the Inland Empire that had been using that phrase as well. But that was really my initial charge. And what I wanted to do a little bit today was to walk a little bit through what is it we were trying to accomplish with Regions Rise Together, kind of the framing of that, and then how that has led into SURF, but more importantly, actually led into some other efforts, hence the point I made about philanthropy. Unfortunately, I've been able to help create another interagency program focused on regional planning that is not coincidentally also $600 million, or is coincidentally also $600 million. That's the Regional Early Action Planning Grants. And so both of those are important because they are proof points of the idea of guaranteed investment in regions, which is part of what SURF is, but the program REAP I'll mention a little bit is quite different. So I think we have a few slides. I don't know if Tristan, they're up there to kind of walk through. Sort of at a high level, a little bit, sort of move to kind of get to region. If we go to the next one, I just quickly wanted to walk through this idea of, why regions? Why were we thinking about kind of our regions as diverse and interconnected? What was it we were trying to do and accomplish with Regions Rise Together? And we had this sort of three pillars that I think is helpful. And then to end with, in part, this conversation you were just kicking around, which is from SURF to what? What does SURF become? Are the 13 regions the basis of something new? Should we be integrating more programs? And to kind of cut to the chase on that, frankly, we have probably too many regional definitions in California. And so an invitation to you all to kind of consider that and poke holes at that. And I think SURF is a hypothesis and a proposal for how to do some of that consolidation that I think we can learn from. If we go from there, I wanted to start just briefly the next slide here with a little bit on a kind of a map of California. I'm an urban planner, and so maps are important. It's also relevant because we arrived by train in Sacramento quite late, which cuts to the chase about the importance of infrastructure investment. But the idea of California was unified in many ways by rail. The United States was unified economically by rail, a series of distinct kind of regional economies. And rail and the way we travel actually forms the mental map, our understanding of places, how they relate to each other, the distance from them, the identity. If we think about each of those communities in the Central Valley, they started out as a hub around a rail station. That is where downtown Fresno is, Bakersfield, Merced, Stockton, you name it. And that is true in most cities. We have grown differently. If we go to the next slide, that mental map of California, though, shifted when we made the investments in the interstate highway system. And for better or for worse, in some ways, some of those communities in the Central Valley were off the mental map of many California travelers. They existed, they were growing, they had economies, but they were disconnected from I-5 in particular. Now, Highway 99 runs right through the middle of those communities and is a critically important kind of lifeline. But in terms of this idea of a mental map and our understanding, we formed more of a gap. And I think Lenny Mendonça mentioned the Enrico Moretti book a couple weeks ago about how the opportunities for someone in Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Modesto 40 years ago might have been roughly similar. That has changed in the subsequent decades. Our infrastructure investments can divide communities or they can bring them together. And so part of my job here in this panel is also to make the link between urban planning ideas and economic development. If we go to the final one of just this sort of first three of looking at it, the investments in high-speed rail are actually about reconnecting California to itself and those cities to each other and coast and inland. So if we do regional economic development well in those communities, and we do the interconnective tissue of connecting the regions of California more effectively, that's where we can actually really transform the economies of places and accomplish some of our climate goals as well, right? High-speed rail is both a climate, critical climate project and economic development. So to go to kind of the next piece here, we can go to the next slide as well. Just to make this, re-articulate this point about kind of regions as important. So California is an incredibly large state. You all understand that well, but it's really a series of pretty diverse regional economies that are somewhat distinct from each other. The military and medical biotech industry in San Diego, the entertainment complex around Los Angeles, and the vast manufacturing, the technology industries in the Bay Area, the logging industries in the far north, and the kind of fortunes of those industries change the fortunes of the respective regions. And if we think about what happened to the North State, where I have a lot of family, what happened with the timber industry, the decline in the timber industry has also resulted in the economic challenges facing those places, even as the rest of California was doing quite well. So we can have a disconnect within California, and that's actually been part of the story of what we've seen in our state. But regions truly are places that we interact. And Vice Chairman Varner from the Inland Empire, if we think about the history of the Inland Empire and the infrastructure investments in the rail infrastructure that made the capacity for goods movement and warehousing to be a critical part of the economy, helped lead to the growth of that industry in the place, but also shape the types of jobs that are there as well. At the same time, the land use decisions in coastal Southern California and Los Angeles and close to the water also shape the demand for people to live in those areas as well, and many of them facing quite crushing commutes. And so the industry decisions on the one hand shape the kinds of jobs, but the planning decisions on the other hand shape where people go. And oftentimes in California, we have a kind of drive till you qualify. So if we go to the next slide as kind of continue through these, each of those regions has a distinct basket of industries. And so SURF is actually going to help each region kind of go through this process and identify those. This is called a location quotient. It's looking at the concentration of jobs in a region relative to the state. One can do it for the nation as well. But you see that there are leading industries in each region. Each region does not have the same. And often what you're looking at in a location quotient is actually the export jobs, right? Healthcare exists in every region in California, as does education, as does local government, as does retail and construction. Very important, and we need quality jobs in those industries. But what's going to really drive the region's growth are these more export-oriented industries. And so you see those distinctions. Information's way in the upper right in the San Francisco Bay Area. Professional services is in the upper right, both concentrated and growing in the southern border. The San Joaquin Valley region, you see that, again, strength in agriculture. In the kind of North State, you see the strength of forestry, still concentration, even though kind of evolving and changing. So those different baskets are what we see, and the economic diversification strategy is what SURF is trying to work on. Go to the next slide. as well. But what we saw when we launched Regions Rise Together is this sort of tale of two states. And I think Lenny talked about this as well, this declining incomes from the coast relative to inland, significant amount of the job growth being on the coastal areas as well. And we looked at a series of other metrics. If we keep going through these slides, go to the next one. We looked at this idea that the percentage of knowledge jobs is actually quite a bit lower in the inland areas. So if you have an industry that's forming, that's creating high quality jobs that are high wage, and the percentage of those jobs in one region is a lot lower, it's not surprising that the incomes are going to be changing over time. And that's in part of the kind of great divergence we've had throughout the country. This isn't just a California phenomenon. California just has it very distinctly coastal versus inland. If we go to the next one as well. And the idea of this inland coastal gap was an important part of what we thought about initially with Regions Rise Together. But folks coming from the Central Coast and the northern part of the state on the coastal areas will say it's not universally true that the coast is performing excellently from an economic perspective. And further, there are tremendous inequalities within those existing regions. But we have in California a pretty significant coast versus inland. In addition, some of the environmental burdens, particularly in the inland areas as well. If we go to the next slide. And we also had this notion of the cost crisis. The affordability crisis, again, isn't just a coastal phenomenon. It has increasingly become an inland areas. And this is some analysis we did of housing and transportation costs. So some people may find lower housing prices, yet their transportation costs are significantly higher. Therefore, affordability writ large becomes a greater challenge. And so this is something where those metrics are actually worse in some inland areas. If we can kind of keep moving through some of these as well. But a key part of this idea is to see opportunity in all places. That this was a story and an approach of saying there are assets to build upon in all parts of California. Universities that exist, UC Merced is a huge investment, a kind of a big idea. And growth poles is a notion in economic development, but I think even beyond that, the shaping of the economic geography of California, University of California, the CSU system have been a big part of that. Of course, other infrastructure investments as well. If we keep going, next one. And then clearly within this was some data that I think you've all cited as well that came from the Future of Work Commission, that we also have a gap in the wages, that it's racialized clearly as well, but certain areas of California, significant amount of the workforce is making low wages. So the idea of quality jobs, something that's long been identified, then it becomes a critically important goal when you work on a SURF kind of project. And as you may have heard about from some of the regions in the discussions that they've been having in recent years, identifying what a quality job is important. I assume Merrick spoke about that last time in the work that they did in Kern County. If we keep going, next slide here. So the economic success requires tailored strategies, right, for each place that builds on understanding what's there. Agriculture has been core for some parts of the Central Valley, but warehousing and logistics and goods movement is a growing piece in Kern County. How are those industries growing? What are the forces shaping them? Agriculture is going to be changed by the water access that's happening in the Central Valley. That changes the kind of jobs or the total number of jobs, as do the infrastructure investments and the availability of what's going to be happening in warehousing. So we have the ability to tailor the industry strategies. Next slide here. So Regions Rise Together, then, we launched this with Lenny in part by going out and listening to communities. And so many of the points that you've raised here were ideas that we heard. We heard about the challenges of small communities trying to access state funds, needing to hire a grant maker that they didn't have the funding for if you're a small city to access a myriad of state programs. The idea that one size doesn't totally fit all, that each place is somewhat distinct. But we tried to then develop a framework of, given all that complexity and variety, what are kind of 3 pillars of efforts that we need to do? And so I want to just walk through that really quickly of the 3 pillars. Next slide here. So Regions Rise Together was both thinking about inclusive economic development and sustainable land use planning. It was both and. And the important piece here, as we get to talk about some of the programs that have been created, is that we have existing institutions at the regional scale that do land use and transportation planning, metropolitan planning organizations. They have a geography, I have a map slightly different that looks different from SURF, but not coincidentally, we tried to model the SURF regions to an extent to those MPO boundaries would stay somewhat intact, because those are institutions that bring local governments together that are required to put forth a plan to meet land use targets, to meet housing goals, to meet climate goals. And the state has actually not funded them significantly, but that's one of the things we were able to do. So the next slide, let me show you the kind of three pillars of the work. So what we argued in Regions Rise Together is we have these kind of three ideas. We need to change our mental map of the state and see opportunity in all places. And there's distinctiveness, and we need to build on that. Second, we need to invest more in regions up activity. So SURF is an example of regions up activity. So too are the regional plans that happen at the metropolitan planning organizations. How do we do that? But how do we invest in a consistent way, I think, is the issue. And I also, the example that Derek gave of the staff working from GoBiz in the actual regions, that's promoting regions up work. And then finally, the connective tissue, strengthening that. The high-speed rail investments, broadband investments, higher education, that is about strengthening. California, we're not a series of islands. So if we go to the next slide here, couple of the successes we wanted to share with you about that. One is in philanthropy, that in part through the conversations and our former colleague Kathleen Kelly-Janis at the governor's office really made connections with philanthropy, raised the idea that about half of dollars from philanthropy were going to the Bay Area. Huge need in the Bay Area, but it's certainly not half of California. And so the James Irvine Foundation is an example of one of the philanthropic partners that had already been investing in inland California, and we're starting to see many more start to work on that. And some of it is actually about the nonprofit infrastructure that wasn't there. And so you begin with the seed investments and build on it. Mayor Swearingen's work with the Central Valley Community Foundation and the Drive work, you're building up that nonprofit capacity that then other philanthropic partners can come to and add investment in. And so it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling process that builds on itself. The mental map kind of idea as well, we Bitwise is a company you may have heard about that was in Fresno that was has been involved in training thousands of people, launching companies. They were able to secure a significant amount of venture capital funding to expand their operations, but they didn't want to go to the coast. They wanted to stay in inland California, go into Modesto, go into Bakersfield, in part to align with the future rail service. That idea of, oh, wait, there's tech opportunities in these communities changes the mental map. And so that's sort of an important piece. So it's not a program per se, but it's an outcome that you can start to measure. Next, to kind of speak about the next slide here. With the Regions Up planning, Fresno Drive is one that when we began Regions Rise Together, that alignment happened kind of simultaneously. And when you may have heard when the governor met with the leaders from Fresno in November of 2019 and saw 50 people around the table representing all segments of that community, people that had not necessarily worked together before, but had over several years with the leadership of various organizations, some of the investment from the Strategic Growth Council, come together around a vision. That was the idea of, that's what Regions Up planning looks like. And then the state invested some dollars in it, and you're going to learn more this afternoon about the Future of Food Initiative, which was one of the programs there. I mentioned the regional staff at GoBiz, and also we were able to put some seed funding into B3K, an initiative in Kern County. That all was happening prior to the creation of SURF. Those were all programs we were trying to do as a proof point, but we didn't have the dollars in place to do something bigger. And unfortunately, and fortunately, the opportunity of 2020 with a significant infusion of federal funds allowed us to make a larger case of there is a need. We've been hearing about it from places. Let's build something bigger. And so if we go to the next slide, we were able to in SURF, but I wanted to just pause for a moment on the regional early action planning grants, because the idea is it's different from SURF, but it's the notion that every region is trying to meet a climate target. Every region is producing one of these plans, but they're competing often. If you're in Tulare County, you might be competing for a grant with folks in Santa Monica. But the one size fits all means one size doesn't fit all means that we do need to tailor the investments to the communities the way it's going to work best for them. But we still have state goals we're trying to accomplish. We still have climate targets. How does each community design it effectively, but have guaranteed funding? So part of the idea of REAP is a test case around formula funding. Every metropolitan region will get its share of funds based on its 2030 population growth. And that was critical to say places that are growing more should get a little bit more, but the state's going to set guardrails for what you spend the money on. And so I think that's an interesting idea for you to reflect on other potential programs. Guaranteed funding, but the state saying, here's our values and here's what we want to spend it on, but you figure out how to do it best within your community. So REAP, I would say, is very much one of the outcomes of Regions Rise Together, in addition to SURF. And those institutions, as you see there, and we'll just see in a moment to close with on the maps related to SURF, those regions are already pulling people together. They're already communities of conversation, but they're quite different geographies. Some are single county and some are multiple counties. And so when we got to defining SURF, we had to build on that. So to close, if we can just go to the next slide here, go through, well, sorry, should mention this in the interconnective tissue, high-speed rail is very much an example of that. And it doesn't always get the attention that people are aware of it, but at this point, if we go to the next slide, we are now almost at the place 380 miles that's environmentally cleared. So from San Jose all the way to Palmdale, finishing up the environmental process in the rest of the Bay Area, obviously significant amount of construction on the ground in the Central Valley. This is an example of what we are trying to accomplish by better connecting the state and connecting the regions that integrates very well with the idea of each region doing its own distinctive land use plan and economic plan. And so in the kind of, to close here, go to the next slide. SURF is the opportunity to kind of rethink the boundaries of our regions and how to do this more effectively. And so there are many, many regional programs across California. If we go to the next slide, you can see how there's different ways, depending on what we're defining, depends on very different regional geographies. Habitat, water systems tend to cut across county boundaries, as do, frankly, commute patterns, right? The kind of the way we actually live our lives or the economic relationships. When we start doing economic analysis, the county is the basic unit of activity. California happens to have some very large counties like San Bernardino and Riverside, and some smaller counties. And even within those, you might see distinct economic regions that are, the Coachella Valley itself is an economic region in and of itself, a part of something much larger. So that is a challenge, but I think we can, if we keep going to the last couple slides here, walking through a series of ways of thinking about how is California organized. McKinsey did some interesting work on these idea of archetypes of the different economic challenges places are getting at. But what this doesn't get at is the relationships between, say, a Madera and a Fresno and a Kings and a Tulare. It's looking at the kind of data on that county in and of itself. We go to the next slide. We really wanted to leverage what EDD had already worked on with some of its analytic work and look at more of these economic markets that was based on commuting and where some of the job centers were. And you can see there's a very large area in the North State. There's quite a large area in Southern California, and then the San Joaquin Valley really as one economic region. And we felt in talking with people, in looking at additional economic data, that this got close, but it was probably too few economic regions for the purposes of SURF. We wanted to divide it up a little bit more, and it leads to a question of where's Ventura, Central Coast or Southern California? Are LA and Orange one region? The Inland Empire is a distinct region. Is Imperial part of it or not? And to close on the last one, we landed on this map and had an opportunity to put it out there and have conversations with people and sort of conclude with this question here of both, this is not perfect. There's no way to kind of get a perfect kind of regional map, but it's an important starting point that I think recognize distinctiveness between regions and is a place that we can build on. Is 13 the right number? Should it be 14, 12? I think becomes a question that we should get at. But New York State launched on something similar about 12 years ago, divided the state into 10 economic regions, and then dedicate some funding for each of those economic regions. So a question before you and us in the policy space is, do we continue to align more around this? Do we continue to get more state programs that start using this geography, more staff in there, and key work across silos? One of our great challenges in state government, we have a lot of state agencies that are topical silos, but the lived reality of people is dealing with housing and transportation and childcare issues and education. And so how can the state adjust to be more integrated, like we are across the kind of boundaries here, but then we can potentially align more resources to these areas. So thank you for your attention. Look forward to the conversation, and we'll pass to my colleague.
Commissioner Emerson, then Commissioner Buiza.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank each one of you for your presentation today. I think it's been excellent. I am from the inland Southern California region, along with Commissioner Vice Chair Varner. 40 years ago, there was very little communication between Riverside and San Bernardino counties. You could not get a newspaper in Riverside County that represented San Bernardino County. And over the years, we've had several public interest groups that have grown up, the Monday Morning Group in Riverside, as well as Inland Action in San Bernardino County. And I'm hoping that your representative in that area will communicate with those two organizations, because they represent a wide variety of education, industry, healthcare, manufacturing, and I think they would give you some valuable insights into our area. The issue I'm interested in is the movement of goods. I know that you presented the fact that you're kind of basing high-speed rail as a way to move people around. But the big problem we're facing in inland Southern California is the movement of goods. We're seeing a proliferation of warehouses in my area, and where it used to take maybe 20 minutes to a half hour to get from my community, Redlands, to San Bernardino was 20, 30 minutes. Today, it can be upwards of 2 hours at some point. So I think we need to look at how we move goods and how we create that kind of an economy in our area. So I hope that you look at that as part of your goals in this area. I remember when I first went to the legislature back in 2005, Schwarzenegger was governor at that point, and we looked at extending the Alameda corridor east, but we didn't extend it far enough east. And I think that's something we need to look at, because the traffic situation creates, I think, an adverse impact on our economy in Southern California. So I just hope that you take a look at those kinds of issues as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's actually an excellent point that you raise, and apologies for not speaking more about goods movement. One of the other outcomes of Regions Rise Together that started just before the pandemic was Lenny Mendonça and Kate Gordon co-chaired an interagency task force focused on goods movement and freight. And part of the idea was it's massively growing as an industry. It has infrastructure needs. There are a tremendous number of jobs being created, but also there are planning challenges associated with it. As you simply describe, if the highways are full of trucks that are moving goods back and forth, are there more efficient ways to deliver that? And we've worked quite a bit with CalSTA of looking at these opportunities. We've partnered with GoBiz about looking at inland port ideas, and actually the state has supported a number of efforts from the Central Valley in applying to federal government for inland port concepts. But this is one where the relationship between goods on trucks versus goods on trains has an impact on the highway system, which relates to where people live and how they're moving around, which is in part the kind of an example of how the planning and the economy are absolutely totally intertwined. And so wish we had a better answer for how to solve that. But I think it's one that will come up in the course of these conversations and will shape the kinds of infrastructure investments. And I believe actually in the Inland Empire, an idea we've heard about quite a bit is a sort of global center for logistics as an economic idea in the Inland Empire, which has some merit, but also the question of really what kind of investments will change the dynamic on the highways, and that rail versus truck is really a critical one. So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, thank you. Just one follow-up. I know there's been a large discussion about moving an inland port out to the Banning area near Cabazon, so that would move the goods farther to the east. I don't know if the people in the low desert would appreciate that due to the traffic situation, but I think that's something that we all need to take a look at. Thanks so much.
Lisa?
Thank you for the comprehensive testimonies. I'm actually learning a lot more about California from this. My question for Mr. Terplan is about how you're structuring your engagement with philanthropy. In my day job, I work very closely with a number of them, including the Irvine Foundation. And their combined endowment is still, of course, no match to what the state can provide. So, and the nature of grant making is very fickle and sometimes dependent on how much money they make in any given year. So I just want to be, I'm curious about what is the commitment that some of these foundations have given to this project in terms of sustainability and continuity, given the nature of just philanthropy in general. And to point out that, for example, they experience their own disparities, right? The Silicon Valley Community Foundation has nearly $10 billion in endowment, but they only provide funding for a very limited number of regions in the San Francisco and the Bay Area counties. So what is the nature of that? And a related question to that is a very particular region, which is the San Diego area. They are really under tremendous strain from the migration challenges they are experiencing right now. It isn't going to stop anytime soon. So just flagging that particular attention really needs to be paid there, because we've been talking with a lot of civil society organizations there that are going to be part of this project, and they're just very under-resourced and under a lot of strain at the moment.
That's an excellent question. I'll just address one point and then pass it to my colleague Mary to talk about some of the additional engagement with philanthropy. The example I gave was in part the Irvine Foundation identifying a series of priority regions that were throughout California that aligned with some of the regions that we had been talking about in Regions Rise Together. So that was a big kind of additional, commitment over several years that they were involved in. And then there's been an ongoing series of conversations with philanthropy and roles that they can play in SURF, and pass it to Mary to build on that.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. In the spirit of aligning investments and having coordination, our agencies have been in communication and working with different foundations. So for instance, there are some actually very excellent opportunities that have come where foundations are supporting the Community Economic Resilience Fund. The Irvine Foundation is working with the Sierra Health Foundation to provide about $14 million to help community-based organizations access the Community Economic Resilience Fund program. And so that's an example of the investment that philanthropy is making in this program to see it move forward and to make sure there is access and voices at the table. And I'd say also that some of the leadership team, Director Sam Asefa of OPR and Secretary Natalie Pelugii coordinate with foundations through a task force that they're on, Jobs and Economy Task Force, where there's a number of different foundations from California that participate in that. And so we've been sharing about SURF, talking about how they can best align their resources, because many of these foundations have similar goals that we have for the SURF program.
Yeah, I think commissioners have some questions, but I also want to make sure that Ms. Collins, we've got about a half an hour left, and you may have had some specific points that you wanted to make, and maybe we can get to that as soon as the commissioners have their questions. So
I just really want to make an observation and sort of building on what Commissioner Emerson said. So I am the immediate past general counsel for the Port of Los Angeles. And so for goods movement, there are a number of stakeholders, as you're all aware. And I would say if they're not part of the discussion, and they're difficult to get to the table, I concede that point. But if they're not part of the discussion, building it will not make it happen. And the Alameda corridor is still underused to this day, unfortunately. So the idea of putting it below ground is a huge improvement, but underutilized. So it's interesting where you said it 12 regions, 14 regions. I would almost suggest that the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach together are a region that connects to every single one. And so I guess in some ways my experience as being the GC there is a cautionary tale that if you're not talking with the Class A railroads, Tier 1 railroads, if you're not talking to the trucking industry and the shipping lines, they have a mind of their own, and it's not necessarily where your mind is. So it's just a flag that I hear what Bill is saying, and I think, yeah, moving goods and trying to disperse some of the impacts is a good idea, but just if we build it without their input, they're not going to follow that. They're going to continue to do what makes economic sense. And there is quite an effort underway, both I know with DD's involvement and also with the federal government. There is a constant discussion about improving goods movement, obviously, and the impacts. So, and yeah, people are reluctant to come to the table, but we have to get them there. So it was just more of an observation than a question. Thank you.
Commissioner Sidley, if I could just add some context to, you're absolutely right. Director Myers, as well as our new Deputy Director of Sustainable Freight and Supply Chain Development, Traylon Bradley, are deeply invested in partnerships along with CalSTA with all of the container ports and other ports in California. And I think there's some really fabulous partnerships that can be built on, like those with the ports of LA and Long Beach and the LA Economic Development Corporation. They were a successful recipient of a US EDA Build Back Better grant to start considering ways in which to tie the port infrastructure more directly into the local economy through many, many ways. And so I think that there's an immense amount of partnership opportunity that can be developed. And those, both Director Myers and our Deputy Director, are deeply invested and excited about the opportunities to start tying a lot of those groups together. So I just wanted to say thank you for that comment.
Going back to the philanthropic investment discussion, I know that community foundations play a critical role in bringing in some of the private foundations, and Don Howard and the Irvine Foundation have been transformative in raising that discussion. Obviously, Mayor Swearingen up in Fresno and Michelle Decker at the Inland Empire Community Foundation are really involved in that and are, I consider, game changers. How do I identify similar type of people in these other regions? And they may exist, but those are the two that I know that I see them very active and have been great advocates as conveners to all the nonprofits in their areas. How do we find those people to bring those people to the table to ensure that they have the discussions with the private foundations and educate them on the various nonprofits in these regions?
That's an excellent point. Actually, that was one of the observations we had in the initial listening sessions with Regions Rise Together, is that there are leaders of community foundations up and down the state who really are that hub. Marion Cannon in Stanislaus Community Foundation, Moses Zapian in San Joaquin Community Foundation. Up in Redding, it doesn't have the name Community Foundation, but it's also playing an important role similarly in really bringing people together. And I think they may not all have the same level of resources as the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, but they have that level of trust. And so one of the critical pieces, or they have the capacity to develop greater amounts of trust in their respective region. And I think that is one of the most critical factors as the SURF regions get going, is how will people communicate across these different silos and cities? And as Commissioner Sidley was mentioning, bringing new people to the table, a variety of ones. So I think the community foundation can be the hub. I don't think there is the same kind of person in every region, but we have seen that there are many more and the ones you named are fabulous. But there's Kristen Watson, who had been in Bakersfield, had been at the Kern Community Foundation, has subsequently moved to CSU Bakersfield. But I think some of those people exist in a number. I don't know if my colleagues know of other foundation leaders that are similarly in regions.
Well, I'd like to add, I think this is the opportunity to see new leaders emerge across the state. There's certainly folks that we know that are doing this work out in the field right now, but now we have this opportunity to build an inclusive table. There's going to be resources, there's going to be connections to philanthropy, connections to, other programs. And so I think this is going to be an amazing opportunity to see new faces, new leadership across the state of California in areas where this hasn't been done before.
We haven't heard from Commissioner Aroner, and I understand that she'd like to either make a comment or ask a question. There you are.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Sorry I can't be with you in person, but I'm actually self-isolating because I have contracted COVID. So, and I'm doing fine. So that's not the issue, everybody. It's kind of at this point. But I did want to mention, because while we're talking a lot about building and facilities and infrastructure and all of that, we aren't talking too much about human resources. And from my perspective, anyway, we have a human resources crisis, not only in California, but across the country, right? We have how many openings and jobs and people that aren't filling them and maybe because they're the wrong jobs and they don't pay enough. But we also in California have a significant hospitality industry that has been absolutely wreaked havoc with because of the pandemic, and probably in other states as well. It's not just us, right? But one of the issues that we're going to need to face, and you're reading it in newspapers every day, sometimes above the fold on the front page, is we don't have a childcare industry that can perform for us well enough to be able to ensure that people can return to the hospitality industry. You and I walk when I'm able to get out of self-isolation, I walk up and down streets and see for employment, please apply for jobs, right? In every restaurant. And pretty much every service place, right? Every retail place at this point. And the lack of revenue, the lack of dollars to pay them is the reason that they can't come back to work, and they can't come back to work without early childhood education. And so I'm just wondering how this all figures into your conversations at this point, as you look at certain regions where we have childcare deserts, for example. And I don't mean just literally geographic deserts, because yes, we have geographic deserts with no childcare, but we have childcare deserts in the middle of LA. We have them in the middle of, of any urban setting, that kind of thing. And we aren't meeting the need actually, so that women can return to work, particularly low-wage women of color who can't return to work because they can't find childcare. So how is that all playing out in these conversations?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. I'll kick it off, given I'm the only one 9 months pregnant on this panel. But I'd like to say, in terms of the program, what we're doing is taking a snapshot of what's going on in each regional economy. So, what is working, what's not working, what's the region's comparative advantage, and what are some of the things that need to be fixed. And so, in the different analyses that we have equity analyses focused in there, especially looking at disadvantaged communities. And so that's part of the work that's going to be done. That's part of the work that this $5 million is going toward. And we've also really thought about, how do we build these new inclusive tables, and who hasn't been at the table before? Because if you are a working mom and you have 3 kids, you probably aren't going to be able to get to a 3 p.m. meeting. So we are allowing for flexibility for dollars to go to things like childcare for folks to actually be at the table. And I think that's something that's, very speaks to the values of this program in terms of how we're designing it to increase access for participation, and in addition to actually what we're looking at and planning for in the program.
And then a follow-up question is in looking at the workforce itself, right? How is the labor movement playing a role in all of this? And I don't mean just the building trades, because of course they're going to be at the table because you're talking about infrastructure, right? Traditional infrastructure. But there's a whole rest of the labor movement that is much beyond that, right? That's the service industry world. And how are they going to be included in all of this planning?
Thanks, Commissioner. Glad to know that you're doing well, and hope that you're staying safe over the next couple of days of isolation. We're excited about building a really inclusive and broad table, and labor has a really, really important place to play in these conversations. And so as the High Road Transition Collaboratives are built in each of the 13 regions, and the regional conveners are looking to help set those tables, there'll be an immense opportunity for direct outreach, obviously with the labor agency so directly involved. We've got some really fabulous and direct connections to ensure that labor groups representative of all variety of trades have an opportunity to have a voice at the table. I think it comes back down in large part and in great part to the conversation or the statement that I made at the beginning of how do we do outreach directly to people, and how do we move beyond many of the organizations as well into their membership and into the individuals that they represent. We had a really fabulous conversation earlier this week or late last week about supporting conveners and adopting, this sounds funny, but adopting the outreach model that the California Department of Parks and Recreation has when they're looking at building a new park. They physically go to parks and learn from the kids and their parents what types of swings and slides they want to have in their communities. And I think that as we consider an opportunity to reimagine and revisit how we're doing planning, we've got to think about how we go out into the community and go onto factory floors and go into organizations and talk to people rather than just relying on data or what individual representatives have said. So I think a lot of opportunity for outreach, and we're grateful for the labor groups that have already expressed participation or an interest in participating or are currently participating in a regional collaborative as they review the SFP.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Seeing no other questions, Ms. Collins, did you have something that you wanted to do? I want to make sure you had an opportunity to present if you had something. You don't feel compelled.
Well, thank you for that opportunity, Commissioner. Given I did miss a few of the first minutes and our apologies for the train delay and the fire. So, for me, I wanted to set up a little bit about why this program is happening, why is it needed, why now, and some of the goals and objectives and just basic program structure. I'm not sure if any of this has been teed up yet. A little bit. Okay. Well, it might be helpful to kind of wrap all of this up because we've had a lot of different discussion going from the big picture regional level to thinking about reporting. And so it could be helpful to think a little bit about the why and the goals and the structure, especially moving into the afternoon session. So I'll touch on some of that. So the SURF program, it was created to promote a sustainable and equitable recovery from the economic distress of COVID-19 by supporting new plans and strategies to diversify regional economies and foster long-term economic resilience in the overall transition to a carbon neutral economy. So this came about by Senate Bill 162 last fall to fund this $600 million program. Initially, this was funded by American Rescue Plan Act dollars. That was changed in February of 2022 by Senate Bill 115, which modified it to general funds. Just as background, there's not much of a change in terms of goals and trajectory, but it does give us more flexibility in things like reporting, expenditure timelines. And so for us, that's a really good thing that change occurred. In this program, it responds to a couple of dynamics at play in California. Egon teed up some of these, but first and foremost, what I wanted to kick off with is the persistent economic inequity that we're seeing in our state. I think Egon mentioned the hollowing out of the middle class, but also we see a lot of disparities and racial disparities in our state, and both COVID and climate change have disproportionately impacted people of color and low income Californians across the state. This especially impacts things like jobs, access to economic opportunities. And that's really one of the frames for this program. And we know that these inequities that exist today, they didn't happen by accident, but they're really from decades of government and private sector policies that have facilitated these inequities. And so that's why, as we're creating this program, going back to business as usual is not an option. And there's a very strong focus on inclusivity and equity. And second, transitions in our economy. Planning for a resilient economy and preparing for changes that we're seeing as it relates to climate change, as it relates to drought. Those things have to go hand in hand because we have a lot of shifts that are occurring in industries throughout the state. So we might have some industries that could be declining due to structural market forces or policy changes. We could have industries that are growing and then others that are going to shift and change, thinking about things like agriculture, responding to the drought. And so all of these provide opportunities, challenges as well, but opportunities to look at each region and go, what's the comparative advantage here? What's happening right now? where is the future and how can we upskill or move up the value chain and connect to these different assets and resources that each region has. And so, as we're looking at this thing, climate change and inequity, we think all of these should go together as we're planning for an economic future that all Californians really deserve. And Egon touched on why we're looking at the regional level. A lot of these big levers for job creation, like innovation assets, infrastructure, supply chains, these all occur at the regional level and help support creation of good paying jobs. And so for us, that's why we're looking at the regional level here in this program. There's no one size fits all solution. And that's another thing just to emphasize in this program. There's just 13 regions Egon put up earlier. The solutions are going to work in LA. We're talking about logistics and transport and all of these different dynamics there. They're going to be different opportunities, challenges, and solutions in the North State. And so in terms of program design and terms of program outcomes, we want to be able to provide flexibility for each of these regions because we have the world's 5th largest economy. We have such a diversity of opportunities and resources across the state. And so that's one of the things that we've done is design this program with that flexibility in mind. And so the overall objectives that we've had in designing this program is to promote that regions up approach to economic resiliency, equity, sustainable growth. And also, second, we want to support inclusive planning efforts. We think that that's a pathway to equitable outcomes, to having different voices at the table, to be able to hear what the challenges people are having on the ground. As Derek mentioned, getting out there into the field and understanding what the barriers are for people to access jobs, for instance. And then we've talked about this today as well, but another one of the big goals that we have is aligning investments and priorities throughout the lifespan of the program. So that goes with the planning phase in terms of, helping to make those connections to philanthropy for folks to be able to participate in the program, but also thinking about connecting to different state funding opportunities or federal opportunities as regions come together to create this vision, this roadmap of where the regional economy is going and identifying the investments that are needed, because that $500 million in implementation is a drop in the bucket once you look at our entire economy. And so we want to be able to leverage this and leverage that funding. And this might have been mentioned earlier, but just real briefly to reiterate how the program is structured. It's a 2-phase program. So as was mentioned, there's a planning phase that will support communities and regional groups to produce regional plans for economic recovery and transition that prioritize creation of accessible, high-quality jobs in sustainable industries. So each of our 13 regions will receive $5 million, which truly is an unprecedented amount of money for planning, to be able to get people to the table, to be able to look at research and look at this in a really holistic way in terms of where our economy is going. And so we have an open solicitation to apply to be the regional convener in each of these different areas. And that's an entity that would have the really tall task of building this new table and bringing unlikely partners together and helping oversee this vision. And it's not to say that the awardee would have more power over, another type of constituency. That the idea is that there is going to be a governance model in place that brings these different voices together in a meaningful way. And then so from that regional strategy that's created, there will be about $500 million in funding that will come out this winter. And so that will happen on a rolling basis, and we'll have more details on implementation fund criteria. We've talked about some of it. We want to align with climate goals, have demonstration of labor standards and job quality, but there will be more details coming out this fall, and that will align with when these different high road transition collaboratives are kicking off. Another thing I wanted to mention is that there is a tribal funding opportunity that this program has. So we have $20 million. Does that come up today? Okay. I was just wondering because you're nodding your head, Commissioner. We have $20 million of funding for tribes. Tribes are welcome to participate in the regional planning process if that makes sense for them. But there's also another pot of money if they have planning or implementation needs as it relates to economic resilience, job creation. And so right now we're working one-on-one with tribes to do outreach, listen to them. We're going to be developing this in participation and partnership with tribes. So we'll have listening sessions this summer, and we'll be developing that alongside the implementation phase, so the implementation phase can help inform the tribal opportunity. But we want to make sure that it's flexible and it meets tribes and meets their needs. And that's another opportunity for philanthropy to be able to support tribes to be able to apply to this program. I'd say those are kind of some of the key things that I wanted to emphasize. But one of the things that I think makes this program unique is our interagency leadership team, which consists of OPR Director Sam Asefa, Secretary Natalie Pelugii, and Director Dee Dee Myers. And so we all work hand in glove every day on this program. And I think that brings different qualities, different expertise to bear. And that's one thing I want to end on, is that the collaboration between these agencies has been exceptional. Thank you.
Commissioner Buiza.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Actually, I have two questions, one for you and one for everybody. I just wanted to flag that it would be great to also know how you're thinking of reaching out to indigenous populations in general, not just Native Americans. We have a big number of that in the state. Plus, what is your language access strategy? We have about 28% of our state foreign-born population. Many of them struggle with language issues. So I'm curious about that. So that's my question. The second question is, what is the communication strategy for this amazing initiative? Because Egon pointed out earlier the mental map that Californians have, and needing to change the mental templates that we have about how California should be. How are you selling this to the public writ large?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. That language access has been something that we've been thinking about at OPR. We've done quite a bit of outreach to communities over the past 6+ months as we've been designing and developing this in partnership with communities. So we've had workshops in Cantonese and Spanish. We're working right now to get some more information on our OPR webpage translated in Spanish and other languages. And as we're looking at outreach to specific communities, we think that is a good place for the HRTCs to be able to take the lead on, given there are different populations across the state. And so for us, that is a priority in terms of who's able to get at the table. And I'm sorry, I missed your second question there, Commissioner.
Oh, it was about the communication strategy. But to your point about the language, we have more than 225 dialects, right? So
Right.
That's a big job.
Yeah, Commissioner, to your second question, I think it's a unique opportunity for us to really figure out how to take economic development down to the individual level and tell that story in a really different way. So one of the things that we're doing, the money that we're using from the EDA to fund the 13 civil servant coordinators from my office in each of the regions, that goes through June 30th of 2024 to support this effort and pilot this project. We also have funds available in that grant to develop an interagency-owned website, and the secretary and both directors have signed off on this project and are excited about it. One of the core components of that website will be to tell the story of each of the 13 economic regions that we've defined. The economic and demographic stories help people, quite frankly, build pride in their communities and in their regions and understand the ways in which the collaboratives that are formed are starting to prioritize specific investments and look at those opportunities in a different way. And so, so that's like a tangible aspect of something that we're doing, and we're excited about launching that right around the same times that the collaboratives kick off or in the fall. But also challenging the conveners, right, to get out into the community and to imagine opportunities with which they can bring individuals into their storytelling in a little bit of a different way. We've had some fun exercises. If you haven't seen the video that Secretary Pelugii and Directors Myers and Asefa put together, you can visit the OPR YouTube page. The three of them sat together at the California Mobility Center a few weeks ago, which is both a high road training partner as well as a partner of both of the other agencies. and just started dialoguing together about ways in which we can reimagine how California's economy is built. And we imagine some other unique opportunities to tell the stories and to bring individuals into that conversation with them.
Thank you.
Let me take a look at my commissioners. Is there anyone else that wants to contribute in the last 6 minutes before we break for?
Yeah,
There you go. Perfect.
I apologize to my fellow commissioners. I'm just really excited that we're studying this topic. And so I know I have a lot of comments. And I'm also very appreciative of all of you for your dedication in this and for taking time out of your day to be here with us. You mentioned diversifying regional economies. And I know that there's been some discussion around this about obviously taking advantage of resources within these regions. We've got San Joaquin Valley in agriculture, Cal State San Bernardino in cybersecurity, UCR with Oasis and the clean technology and those types of things. But I'm concerned a little bit about short-term, solving short-term goals and saying, oh, well, you have this resource, so we'll concentrate on that. And you said diversify these regional economies. I think it's important to that these plans include what's the future beyond surf and how do you create multiple economies within the region, or at least multiple opportunities to diversify. So I'm just curious if there's, if in the planning process, if there's some direction to the regions with regard to that.
Yeah, I can speak just specifically to kind of what comes next as we kind of consider these opportunities. We're looking at the U.S. Economic Development Administration's model. Once a county or a region develops and has adopted a comprehensive economic development strategy, that county or region has the opportunity to then develop an economic development district that can participate in a federal program. It's the annual partnership planning program, where the federal government will cash match an investment to fund essentially resources, human capital, to further develop the strategies and ensure that the strategies don't go away. For some reason, far beyond my time, California has historically opted not to participate in that program, not from a statewide perspective, but from a regional or county's perspective. We currently only have 5 designated economic development districts, all in Northern California, and really only 3 of them are very active. It's our anticipation that as we consider the adoption of the strategies and sign off from all of the different relevant parties and the local practitioners, that we look to develop those districts and have them participate in this annual partnership planning dollars and look for ways to ensure that at the end of this process, they don't just look at those really shiny objects and say, oh, we funded those, our economy is going to be saved, but they consider what happens next and what happens 10 years from now. And these strategies are going to be great for several years, and then they're going to be updated or need to be updated, right? Just like I said, from the EDA perspective, is about a 5-year timeline. And so institutionally, we're really trying to consider, how do we figure out a way to bring the collaboratives together, but also ensure that they have the capacity to participate on an ongoing basis? It might not always be $5 million that we're investing over, a 18 to 24 month period, but we've got to figure out a way to do that component.
And Commissioner, just to build on that, I know we're just at the end, but part of the analysis that's going to happen will be the identification of both existing leading industries that are growing a lot, but then there might be seed industries that might be forming where there's not a lot of, in the data, you don't see a lot of jobs yet, but you see some new capacities. And when those regions come together and identify investment towards the state from the infrastructure, the $500 million, maybe it's in that people come together and say, there's a cybersecurity opportunity in this region. That's what we want to go after. And I think that's in part, and maybe just, I wanted to close just on a little bit of one point of this kind of tension and challenge between the state identifying 13 regions on the one hand, but on the other hand saying, well, it's regions up and it's bottom up. And is there a contradiction there? There's not. Regionalism forms based on people coming together around a shared set of issues and regions. We think about air quality in the Central Valley, saving the Bay in the Bay Area, the military kind of investment declines in the 80s in Southern California. That's where the kind of seeds of regionalism. However, this is a massive opportunity where the state has sort of put some dollars out and said, you all can come together and access it. It needs to be bottom up for people to avail of themselves. But ultimately, the state can't make the regionalism happen. The state can kind of be in a position of putting it in there. And then those communities then see that opportunity and start to say, okay, we agree that these 3 or 4 or 5 priorities really are critical because the issues are there, they're regional on the ground. But I think it's important to kind of recognize sort of that tension between top down. And I think for you all to reflect on, yeah, where does SURF go from here? Like kind of what is the next iteration of this program or the other line?
And
It's just a
Oh.
quick question. So the 13 regions are made up of different counties, and different counties have different elected officials that have different ideas. What happens, like I'm from Stanislaus County, I think there's San Joaquin, Stanislaus, and Merced. If there's friction amongst the counties, how does that get resolved? Is there like a referee that comes in ultimately and says, this is more consistent with the goals, or how does that get worked out?
I think it's kind of twofold. I was going to jump onto the end of the other question too, is that third-party evaluator and TA is really our facilitator as well. They have their goal and their requirement is going to have community of practices and bring them together and really talk through what the issues are and how to solve such issues, to really make sure that they're looking at it in a global, but understanding that everyone has their own local needs as well. So I think with that, and in addition, the evaluation, when we were talking about how do we know what's working, how do we invest, where do we go, we're really relying on our third-party evaluator too, is to really look into what's happening around the planning table, really see what may be missing out of the plans that were talked about but just didn't make the plan, as well as our engagement with our own team. So as I said, there's a SURF leadership team, but there's also a SURF technical assistance team, which includes Derek's 13 that he's hiring, staff from EDD, staff from OPR. And that relationship between our evaluator and TA, currently I run a program not to this extent, but where we meet monthly with our TA provider after they meet with the community of practice to really talk about how can we fix what's on the ground right now? Are there fixes now that we can go and, like, I call them myth busting, like let's myth bust it right now and tell them what they can do. And then how do we drive the change? Where do we need to go? What other resources do we need to provide? Do we need to have separate meetings to really get down into the needs and what's happening? So I think with that collaboration between this team here, our evaluator, that's really where we're looking for that. And Derek's team being there at the table and hearing maybe the friction before it comes back is allowing us to even go to the leadership team on where do we go? What do we need to change? How do we need to change directions to assist? Or who do we need to bring in for that assistance? Because I think there's more than just this table trying to do SURF and really looking at what it can do. As Egon said, there's a lot of state agencies that put money into similar projects. So and I think that's the fine line, right? How do we walk other resources? Like someone may really want this, but we can find another resource for you to get that. So let's negotiate at the table. Let's collaborate, negotiate. And I think that's going to be one of the top priorities for the convener as well. That convener needs to be able to negotiate and compromise and really bring the total vision of what this is for to that table, so they keep striving and going towards that and not coming to that standstill.
Yeah, I think you make some really important points. Some of what is important in what I have seen on this commission is the significance of the personalities of the players. And so as you look at who you're going to give the responsibility to bring people together, then you're going to apply those skills that you have come to learn over time. You're not going to bring in the personality type who is obvious to you, is going to tell people where to sit and when they get to talk and what they get to talk about, because you know that leads to failure. And when I was in office, and I don't know about some of the other folks who were members, by the time they come to apply to work in my assembly office, they've got skills. Okay. They understand how to work the telephone and who it is they're supposed to call. So I'm not looking for skills. I'm looking for the chemistry. I want to know, is this person, have they demonstrated an interest and a willingness and a passion and a duty to help? Do they understand that in order to get to the goal, they may have to suppress some things about how they conduct themselves so that they can weave together the different interests that people have? And what we learned in part from the folks in Fresno is you bring people together who've never talked to one another and who engage in myths. about like, oh, I know I'm not going to like that person, right? Because they don't want what I want. But if you it's like I would go talk to groups of people who I knew didn't like me. And I would say, no horns, no tail. So can we talk now? And we ended up, right? We ended up reaching agreement on things because it is about, I think people are fundamentally, good people want to help. And it's about you bringing in good people to do this work. And I look at one of the things, when I was in office, I would talk to people in the district and you hear the chatter, state of California, the employee, blah, blah. And I said, I tell you what, come up to Sacramento on any night of the week and we'll walk through the building. And I guarantee you there will be people at 7:00 at night working at their computer, putting out reports, fielding phone calls, doing the job of serving the public. And I look at your resumes and I'm saying, we're blessed. The people of California are blessed to have you with your backgrounds and with your experience. Any one of you could go to the private sector and make 3 times what you're making now and probably take better vacations and have a better retirement account. But you've chosen not to. And you've chosen not to because you have a belief in the honor of public service. And we are all of us in California are going to benefit by your lack of selfishness. You need to be told that. You need to be honored for the decisions that you have made professionally, where you take your skill and your intelligence and your grace to apply to the people of California to make their lives better in a way that is historic. I think all of you are going to look back at this time in your lives and say, I was a part of that. We were able to bring people together to start thinking on a larger scale about how we improve the quality of life for people in California. Folks, you're never going to meet, but there will be people who get a job and are able to feed their families and have some security for themselves and improve their community because you took the time to apply your skills to this at this point in our history. So I'm ready for a sandwich, but I want to tell you all, thank you so very much for giving up of your time and the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think at this point we should take a brief recess and then we will reconvene for the business meeting. We're having some sandwiches brought in. We'll reconvene the hearing at 1:15. So we'll take a brief break now if we may.
Yeah. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is 1:15 and the time set to begin the afternoon session of the Little Hoover Commission for Thursday, June 23rd. The afternoon session is entitled An Inclusive Cluster Strategy and Focus, the Fresno Merced Future of Food Innovation Initiative. And having given that much of an introduction, let me turn it over to our Executive Director, Ethan Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have 5 witnesses this afternoon, all 5 of whom will appear remotely. We will begin with 2 witnesses from California's public higher education system who will testify together. They both have prepared remarks, and given that some commissioners I know do have to leave a bit early, we may wish to take their remarks together and then ask questions of them jointly, I would suggest. And then we'll have 3 more witnesses after a brief break. So we'll begin now with Dr. Glenda Humiston and Dr. Ram Nunna. Dr. Humiston is the University of California Vice President for Agriculture and Natural Resources. She has 25 years of experience working on agriculture, natural resources, sustainability, and economic development in rural communities. Prior to joining the UC system, she was the California State Director of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development, appointed to this position by President Obama in 2009. She earned her PhD from UC Berkeley in Environmental Science, Policy, and Management with a research focus on U.S. Farm Bill policy. She will be followed by Dr. Ram Nunna, who is the Dean of the Lyles College of Engineering at CSU Fresno, a position he has held since 2014. Previously, he served as interim dean of the college, as associate dean, and as chair of Fresno State's Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. He has also served on numerous university commissions, committees, and task forces. Dr. Nunna joined the Fresno State faculty in 1998. He earned his doctoral and master's degrees in computer engineering at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. So each of them has prepared remarks, and then we can have questions. Dr. Humiston.
Good afternoon, commissioners. It's really a thrill to be here. I do have some slides, if those could be brought up. Thank you, and put into slide mode. I'm going to kick off this panel with a broad overview to set the stage for F3. We're one of many, many partners. In fact, if you could go to the next slide, please. We're one of many partners, and I want to just really quickly let you know who A&R is. We're the portion of the University of California system whose mission is to both create new knowledge through research, scientific efforts in the field, but then to get it out into the hands of communities and people throughout the state. We serve all 58 counties with our cooperative extension advisors and specialists. We have research extension centers throughout the state that range in size from a few hundred to several thousand acres, where we do almost 700 research projects a year. And then we have our agricultural experiment station, which is scientists on 3 of the UC campuses who very closely collaborate with the more basic science end of the research, as then the rest of our folks go into applied and then extension. We also have 13 statewide programs and institutes. These are critical because many of them are resources we utilize as we're interacting with community and economic development, including those over 19,000 volunteers you see there. Next slide, please. So to really set the stage of how the university is truly engaged in the F3 initiative, which we're very excited to be part of, is this idea that we really need government, academia, and industry working together. And that's something we've done for over 100 years throughout California in a variety of different issues. These are just a tiny, tiny handful of the logos of some of the partners we work with. To deliver our mission, we have over 300 contracts, MOUs, and agreements. For example, I have an MOU with every single one of the 58 county governments because we work very close partnership with them, as well as agreements with regional economic development organizations, state and federal agencies, and a variety of private sector entities. Again, this is important because as we look at the regional type of economic development, such as F3, this is the kind of partnership we need going forward in all of our regions on this. Next slide. An example of the foundation upon which F3 is built is a project that started several years ago, the Central Valley Ag Plus Food and Beverage Manufacturing Consortium. This was a project that was actually officially designated as part of the White House Manufacturing Communities Partnership back in 2011 or 12, I believe. And as you can see, the Central Valley, these 28 counties, have a large, large footprint of food and beverage manufacturing companies. And since that time in 2012, we've been working across all of these partners you see on here and many, many others to really start improving regional food systems, supply lines, infrastructure, farm to fork, processing, distribution, every single aspect of that food and beverage manufacturing, including workforce, research and development, infrastructure, all of it. And this is a great example of the kind of really giant regional project that we've got going on around the state. And again, this one's food, but you could substitute a whole lot of other industry sectors for this. But having said this big project, let me show you a little one in the next slide, because it's important that we work at all ends of the scale and throughout the spectrum. This is a fantastic example of how we're trying to work closely with resources, existing resources such as county fairgrounds. Humboldt County up in the north has for several years now served as an incubator for small local businesses. In fact, they've created over 15, a few of which have grown so large, they actually needed to move off and get other space. A lot of these are related to the food sector, but not all of them are. And this is a great example of how we here in California throughout the state can really leverage existing infrastructure and find creative, innovative uses for that. And as we move into F3, that's exactly what we're doing. As you hear from panelists later this afternoon, they'll give you some specific examples of how they're building on some of that earlier work too. Next slide, please. This is just to give you an example of what we do as far as trying to support projects such as F3. We were actually partnering and helping write grant proposals to the Economic Development Agency as part of Build Back Better in several parts of the state. F3 was just really excited that we actually made it into the second round, but other projects are still ongoing too. What's exciting about this is a coalition of the willing. One of the things that I personally have some very strong passion about is not reinventing the wheel and not duplicating what's already out there. So what we've been doing for the last 6 years is going out into different regions around the state, around innovation initiatives, seeing who the existing players are, getting them to the table, finding ways to collaborate, identifying what's missing and how we can get that there, and again, leveraging existing partnerships from throughout the state. This is just the current mix. We have more people joining us all the time, which brings me to the next slide, which is our F3. And you're probably going to see this slide another time or two today, but I think it's worth spending just a teeny bit of time on it. So there's 3 key ingredients for our climate smart food and ag tech engineering cluster. And that's the Fresno Merced Future of Food Initiative, F3. You'll hear that a lot too. The next speaker, Ram, is going to really focus in on the I Create, which is very much a partnership led predominantly by UC Merced and CSU Fresno. And you can see that it's really around some of the scientific research, a joint PhD program, et cetera, that Ram will give you more details on. We are also part of that as far as our scientists being active. But the part that we, UC A&R, is taking an active leadership role is what you see in the orange up there, the local farm and food innovation. So in that capacity, we're helping coordinate several different activities. We're standing up a San Joaquin Valley hub for agroecology, something that local farmers and communities ask for, as well as creating a small farm tech alliance. And we're actually putting some scientists in that location to help move this and expand it. We're also working with partners such as folks in the last 3 speakers you've got on supply aggregation, market access, food hubs, and how we really help these small businesses grow and thrive. So there's a lot going on there. And then, of course, one of the other speakers on the panel will be talking about the workforce activities that our community colleges are taking leadership on and doing a really fantastic job. Woven through all of this, UC, CSU, community colleges, our Central Valley Community Foundation, CDFA, our State Department of Food and Ag, is a key partner. In fact, we are the board of directors. Myself, the secretary of CDFA, the CEO of the Community Foundation, and representatives from UC Merced and CSU Fresno. We are really partnering to try to make this activity happen. So related to that, let me jump to the next slide, which is an example of how we are trying to make this happen. Because again, I think F3 is an exciting initiative. And the folks in the Fresno Merced region have done an amazing job of building up to this initiative over several years, actually a few decades. And you're going to hear more of those details, but they're not the only one. And one of the things we're really interested in is finding ways that we can support these type of regional industry clusters throughout the state and also have them be a bit of a network, sharing best practices and information and leveraging each other. One of the organizations out there that you may be familiar with that has done an amazing job of that is the California Stewardship Network. They're an alliance of regional leaders that are committed to a triple bottom line approach: people, planet, and prosperity. That's one of the reasons I love working with them and have for many years. We recently made this announcement that this slide is at the last State Economic Summit, which the California Stewardship Network helps co-host. I actually serve on the steering committee for the summit and co-chair one of the work groups. But what we did here is something very different for cooperative extension. We actually created these brand new UC cooperative extension positions and have each of them partnered with a member of the stewardship network. And I've highlighted in yellow the one that is going to be located in the Fresno region to directly serve, in particular, that small farm tech alliance, as well as the Hub for Agroecology. And the others you see on this map are equally partnered up with regional economic development. This is something that we've been hearing requested for quite some time. Small rural communities, county governments, economic development corporations, all of these entities are really having a capacity issue in the R&D sector. They need folks that can do that kind of research, provide information for them, work with them to find solutions. And who better to do that than UC Cooperative Extension? Because once you've got a UCCE scientist in your community working with your folks, they then can reach back into the entirety of the UC system to find other experts and knowledge and information and technologies to bring to your regional economic development efforts. Next slide, please. So let me close out with this because it's critical that as we move forward with both community and economic development and trying to support these regional industry clusters, that we have that kind of technical assistance, that research and development support, innovation activities, and everything else that we in the partnership here around F3 are striving to make sure happens in that region, and for myself as a statewide entity throughout the state. At the end of the day, it's really finding those solutions for community and worker well-being, how our industries are able to be resilient, compliant with new rules, as well as just the new challenges they're doing. And then, of course, market competitiveness, growth, and profitability. And let me emphasize for all sizes, large firms as well as micro enterprises, we're trying to make sure all of them have the support and technical assistance they need. So with that, my last slide is just my contact information. And I look forward to your questions and discussion following Ram's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Chairman, we'll hear from Dr. Ram Nunna, Dean of the College of Engineering at Fresno State. Dr. Nunna.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon. I have a slide deck as well, and some of my slides are overlapping what Glenda just presented, and so I might skip a few along the way. Would you go to the next slide, please? First, I'd like to talk a little bit about Fresno State. Our university serves about 25,000 students. 80% of these students are from the San Joaquin Valley. 65% are first in their families to attend college, and more than 80% of our graduates live and work in the region after they graduate. Fresno State has received recognition nationally for graduation rate performance, social mobility, and many more. And last year we were certified and with the 2021 Seal of Excellency Award for our efforts to accelerate Latino student success in higher education. We are also an R2 research intensive university, and faculty are active in research and receive more than $45 million in grants and contracts each year. And we currently have 71 bachelor's degree programs and 48 master's degree programs at the university, along with 3 doctoral degrees. And we're hoping to grow those in the coming years. Next slide, please. Fresno State as a university has been actively involved in the Fresno Drive work for the last 4 years. And we are very excited about the opportunity to contribute towards the Future of Food F3 initiative. We learned a lot about the F3 initiative from Glenda already, so I'm going to skip a few slides and we'll just skip to the next one, please. So this was a slide that Glenda talked about with the 3 critical initiatives that we have. within the F3. And my focus today is going to be on the I create part of the F3. Next slide, please. The I create part is going to focus really on the development, commercialization, and manufacturing of climate smart agri-food technologies using or leveraging resources that we have in our region. Later on, you're going to hear from our community college partners and also from our other community partners on how they would contribute towards the F3 goals. Next slide, please. We're doing this work in the context of a lot of other exciting things that are happening simultaneously in the greater Fresno region, Fresno Merced region. The first one being the incredible support that we've received from the governor's office, from the state of California, with the initial seed funding that we received for F3. And these funds are going to help us to establish the I create, which is a critical component of F3 in downtown Fresno. There are many other initiatives through the Fresno Drive that are currently being funded. A good example of that is the Fresno K-16 collaborative that Fresno State is part of, and that has been a huge success regionally. And we are hoping that we will continue doing this work to increase the opportunities for students, both in the K-12 and in the community colleges and at the university level, to become successful in engineering and other fields that are part of the K-16 collaborative work. We understand that the regional work that we did here in the Fresno Merced area triggered and inspired the state of California to create the SURF program, and we are excited that we could also receive some funding in the future via this program to support some of the work we're doing. The high-speed rail, when it is completed, is going to be a big game changer for us. It will provide our students, our community, access to regions which previously they did not have in the way that the high-speed rail is going to provide for us. A lot of investments have taken place in the community college system locally, and that has a great impact on what happens from an innovation, R&D, and university perspective, and also from the industry workforce perspective. We're truly blessed to have some of the best community colleges in our region. We have great partnerships with our state center community college district, and we have great transfer programs from those institutions to our university, especially in fields like engineering. And there are many other programs that are currently taking place locally that contribute towards the F3 work. Next slide, please. So F3 is going to be successful because we're going to leverage off the assets that we currently have in the region. The I create headquarters, I'll talk a little bit about that shortly, but we also have the academic institutions, UC Merced and Fresno State and the community college system that are going to work together in this process. For the I create part, I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Josh Weers at UC Merced to help shape the structure and work within the I create and the F3, broader F3 area. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the areas that we think are our market opportunity in the next slide. Go to the next slide, please. So this is a chart that shows the market opportunity that we think we have in this region. This market opportunity was developed as a result of feedback from consultants, from our industry partners, and from our community. And this is where we think that the Fresno region, the Fresno Merced region, and the F3 region has the potential to grow by doing work in some of these areas. If you look at data science, if you look at mechatronics, robotics, equipment manufacturing, systems integration, sensor technologies, biomass processing, all of these are going to be important for the future of agriculture and food manufacturing in this region and elsewhere. And we believe that the F3 infrastructure can help grow the industry and innovation space within this market opportunity. And this is the area that we intend to grow to build and grow in the coming years. The target operations are precision agriculture, farm automation, smart food processing, etc. And we believe that we currently have the intellectual capital at the universities and also in the industry sector that can help start or jumpstart the activities needed to grow industry in these sectors in the Fresno Merced region. Next slide, please. So iCreate will become the hub for industry cluster development. We believe that it will be a public-private partnership with the investment that we hope to get from the EDA and with the investment we currently have from the state. Our hope is that because of the work we're going to be doing, over 100 applied ag tech products and services will be created in the next few years. We are expecting and hoping for and working towards at least a $250 million of private sector capital investment in the work that the companies connected with the iCreate would be doing. And our hope is also that in the next few years, at least 30 fast-growing businesses will emerge out of this collective work, creating roughly 3,500 jobs. The goal of iCreate is to mobilize industry, is to support R&D, is to innovate, be partners with industry to create new technologies, to support entrepreneurship and commercialization, and also very importantly to help with talent pipeline coordination. For the greater Fresno Merced region, I think the talent pipeline remains a critical challenge. We need to increase the number of students and others participating in the different STEM fields that lead to the work that is needed to be done to make iCreate F3 successful in the future. I believe the coordination that we're currently doing between our academic institutions is leading in that direction. And so we are surely on a good path. Time will tell if more students from our region are participating. We need them to participate because these are where the great jobs are and the great opportunities are. Next slide, please. iCreate will be an important connector with industry, entrepreneurs, investors, academic institutions, and the community. iCreate will occupy a building in downtown Fresno, the old Bank of Italy building, which was built in 1917, I believe, and unoccupied since 1970. And iCreate will have a headquarters there with a few key people who will work alongside the partners in academia, industry, and the community. We are planning for iCreate to have an innovation catalyst fund that will spur path to commercialization. It will promote engagement between different parties, and also it will provide collaborative challenge grants. We had our first phase of a collaborative challenge grant program recently, and over 20 groups from UC Merced, Fresno State, UC, and industry applied for funding, and I believe 11 projects were selected for funding through the collaborative challenge grant. And these are proof of concept grants, and we're hoping to see some great results within the next 6 to 9 months from this. Next slide, please. So the university assets are Fresno State and UC Merced. UC Merced has great assets, great laboratories, lots of faculty and research. At Fresno State, the assets that we bring are faculty and staff from the Jordan College of Agricultural Sciences and Technology, the Lyles College of Engineering, College of Science and Mathematics. We also have an active 1,000-acre university farm. We also have the WET Center, which is the Water Energy Technology Center, which supports new companies in the areas of water energy and ag entrepreneurship. So over 400 companies have been supported by the WET Center thus far, And these companies have received over $200 million in public-private funding in their work. And they have created 450 new jobs during the years that they have been connected with the Red Center. We also have other institutes that can contribute towards some of the work that we think is part of the market opportunity for iCreate, which is the Transportation Institute, the Water Institute, the Center for Irrigation Technologies, and many other laboratories. Our goals, overarching goals, are innovation, R&D, and this applies to both Fresno State, UC Merced, and expand our entrepreneurial partnerships with companies, individuals, and others, and also do workforce development, skilled workforce development at both the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral levels. Next slide, please. We have many industry partnerships that many groups have committed to partnering with F3, and these are just a sample of some of the large organizations that believe that the work that F3 is going to be doing is going to impact how they operate in the coming decades. Next slide, please. In addition to industry, and we also have many community organizations that are actively involved in F3. And this afternoon, we're going to hear from Cultiva La Salud. And I think the three gears graphic that we saw previously really shows the connection between the R&D, the community, the small farm, and the workforce development that we believe will all need to work together for F3 to become successful in the future. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. And this slide really says what Brookings Institution, they published an article almost 4 years ago. They reviewed cluster activities across the United States, and they looked at what really made certain clusters more successful than others. And they listed these 5 characteristics that needed to happen for clusters to be successful. The first one was focusing on establishing a robust ecosystem. That's what we're doing right now by these collaborative work that we're doing here. It's industry-driven, university-fueled, and government-funded. That's also what we are currently working on. Placing a collective big bet on a unique opportunity. And I think the market opportunity that we've chosen and the assets that we have in our region really make this a good bet with a unique opportunity. It's championed by passionate, dedicated leaders. The Central Valley Community Foundation has been a great convener and a leader in getting all of us together, and all of our participating organizations are collectively, I would say, passionate, dedicated leaders to make this happen. And we are anchored by a physical center, which would be iCreate, and affiliated centers that we're going to create from the F3. So we're excited about this. We believe that it's going to make a difference. And we look forward to working with our partners in making F3 a success. Thank you.
Thank you. Are they going to put, is it possible to put both? There we go. All right, let me turn to my commissioners to see if there's any questions or comments. And as they're collecting their thoughts. But my question to both of you, we've heard testimony from folks that are involved in SURF and basically trying to get people who not always share the same perspective to sit at a table, exchange views, and get past misunderstandings. They've been characterized as myths. That certain people believe things that aren't necessarily well grounded or based in fact, but perhaps not really understanding what the other person is trying to do and accomplish. And I'm assuming that you've done some of that. And so what sort of techniques do you apply to get people who maybe think they don't like each other to understand that there is a common purpose to be shared?
Yeah, that is a great question. That's something our cooperative extension folks have to deal with all the time. As you might imagine, when you get into issues like forest management or water management, as well as just anything else, it's very controversial. You know, there's always a lot of differing opinions. I'd say the thing that we do is, first of all, we try to make sure the key players are involved, and we try to keep the focus on science, data, facts. In fact, in some of our efforts, the first thing we do is try to make sure all of the affected parties are at least agreeing on the definition of terminology, as well as a definition of what the actual problem is. And then from there, try to see where they've got commonality in goals. And often if we can find that 70 or 80%, which is usually there, if we can keep people focused on that and let them see that the other 10 or 20% doesn't have to stop us from moving forward, we can make positive forward momentum. And that success then breeds further success. People see that and they want to be part of it.
Right. So, I mean, you remind me of when I was in the legislature, I did a bill that was basically farm to school. And it was to encourage gardens on elementary schools, and also to promote the sale of California grown produce in California institutions, institutions of higher learning, and correctional facilities. And I had Farm Bureau opposition. And I brought them and actually sat down with the representatives of the Farm Bureau. And I said, okay, what is it you don't like? And we went into the bill, and there was a phrase, right? It was a term of art that I did not, as a non-farmer, understand that it had connotations to the farming community. I thought it was just an English, English, but it was English that had meaning. And when they explained to me what the issue was, I said, is that it? And they go, yeah. And I said, well, change it. And then we changed it. And then the bill moved forward, only to be torpedoed by Maldonado over in the Senate. And I'll never forgive him for it. But it was an example. It was an example of how having a conversation can lead to the understanding of my misunderstanding and misapplication of a particular phrase. I see. Are you ready? Yeah. Okay. We got other commissioners. Thank you.
Bill, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, go ahead. Sure. Dr. Humiston, you mentioned water conservation issues. Are you taking a look at that in your current studies with F3?
Oh, absolutely. In several different ways. A lot of the research will be aimed at helping every aspect of the pre-farm to post-fork, let's put it that way. Because it's, a lot of people don't realize when you hear all this hype about how many gallons of water are in that plate of food you're eating, that often more than half of that water is from the processing after harvesting. It's not the actual growing of the crop. So we've got several different research projects going on to really reduce the use of water during processing and post-harvest. And then I got to give a shout out to CSU Fresno's Wet Center. They're doing some really cutting edge work on irrigation efficiencies, as well as our own cooperative extension folks out in the field. So we'll be looking at how to improve water all across the board, and including for small rural communities as well.
Oh, very good. Thank you. And it's always good to see a fellow 4-H club alum. Thank you.
That is one of my proudest possessions. My father gave me that for Christmas. It was on our house when I was a kid.
It was on the fence in front of our farm down in Riverside County as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here to testify in front of us. I wanted to expand a little bit on the UC presentation as well as Cal State. So sounds like there's some the UC department wants to collaborate with several entities. I saw several there, which was really interesting to see. To what extent is the UC collaborating with Cal State on these initiatives, including what Fresno State's doing, and to what and using an example, to what extent are you? I know at Fresno State, there's a focus on some of the innovation that's coming out of Fresno State, and using UCR as an example. We have an incubator down in Riverside called Riverside Excite. And there's a company called FarmSense that's actually trying to solve precision pest management. And to the extent that that became a viable technology, would that be something that would be implemented in Fresno State's initiative?
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, we partner a lot. I realize some of the rest of the UC from the campus perspective doesn't always, but for cooperative extension, who's out located in all 58 counties, we're constantly partnering with not just the CSU system, but community colleges. I want to make sure we give them a shout out because they're a critical partner as well. But as an example, I actually serve on the Board of Governors for the CSU Systems Agricultural Research Institute. And we frequently in competitive grant programs funding a wide array of research have both CSU and UC scientists working on those projects. So we do a fair amount of collaboration, but we're always seeking to do more.
And through the F3 work, we've already begun to do a little more of that. The recent R&D challenge grant required that the team members be from both UC Merced and Fresno State, or UC Merced and UC A&R. Therefore, this was a forced opportunity for these faculty and researchers to work together. And we currently have, I think, 11 or 12 projects where faculty and researchers are working together from these institutions.
So thank you very much for the presentation. It's very, it's impressive what you're doing, the collaboration and incorporating, when you think about it, incorporating history and tradition with the future and innovation. We very much appreciate the work that you're doing, and it's going to be very helpful to staff and the commission as we put together our report and evaluate the recommendations. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that we now do need to take a short break before our last three witnesses, and then we'll be back in about 2:10, let's say,
Okay.
for our final three witnesses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kristen, I'll be in touch with you.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was confusing.
And thank you so much.
There.
All right, folks, we took a brief break. It is 2 o'clock, and I understand that we have additional witnesses that are available. And so, Mr. Rarick, if you'd be so kind.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So the first witness is Dr. Chris Vitelli, who is the Superintendent President for the Merced Community College District. We heard from the last witnesses about the importance of community colleges in the F3 initiative. Dr. Vitelli has more than 18 years of experience in management and administration, including senior administration level experience, serving in various capacities, including CEO, Chief Student Services Officer, Chief Instructional Officer, and Accreditation Liaison Officer. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Extension and Communication at the University of Florida, a master's from Harvard, and a Doctor of Education at Arizona State University. So we'll now go to Dr. Vitelli.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to join you today. It is around 100 degrees in the Central Valley, so I am a little bit more business casual these days, but not when it comes to the work we're doing. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to spending the next few minutes talking about some of the great work we're doing in collaboration with the Central Valley Community Foundation. I know that you've already been given a pretty thorough overview of some of the components as it relates to the future of food and innovation. And so if we could scroll down to the fourth slide, you'll see on the screen the opportunity, and that's what I really want to talk about and put into the context of where the community colleges are playing a key role in this innovative approach to workforce development and integration with our industry. As the previous speakers most likely reviewed with you, this entire project that's integrated with research, innovation, workforce development, community partners, incumbent farm workers, and others, is related to the food value chain that you see on the screen. As we look towards the next 10, 15, 20 years in agriculture, the Central Valley of California really is going to become the location for target applications of precision agriculture, farm automation, smart food processing, small scale farm, and food tech. And as such, we've got to make sure that we are preparing a workforce, both the incumbent workers that may lose their jobs to automation. We have to prepare them adequately to upskill, but we also have to prepare the future workforce for agriculture, technology, and engineering clusters. And as such, this project in the California Central Valley will really focus on ensuring that the agri-food technology and engineering clusters are really a powerhouse to address these issues. And it's going to be through inclusive economic development strategies. And the community college system is well prepared to make sure that we're addressing the workforce needs of the future. Next slide. I primarily will be focusing on, in this next slide, the blue portion of the ag tech component. So can someone move me to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'll be focusing on the ag tech portion. I believe those who went before me talked about really the research, development, and innovation portion, which is what you see in green, the local farm and food innovation components, which is in orange. I will preface it with everything we're doing is in partnership and collaboration with those entities. The ag tech portion is a new and innovative approach to ensure that we prepare 8,400 job-ready workers in 4 years who experience an average of a 40% increase in wage growth as a result of the training. Half of these workers will be incumbent workers, and the other half will be new workers that are entering the workforce. You'll see in the blue shaded areas, we have a three-pronged approach to ensuring that we are preparing regionally skilled workforce in a pipeline that's ready for the future. One is through industry aligned and interdisciplinary curricula. The other one is connecting talent to industry. And the third really has a very focused approach on competency-based education and simulating what students will eventually experience in the workforce within the innovation centers within the community colleges. Next slide. So I'm going to stay on this slide and I'm going to focus on what you see on the screen, numbers 4, 5, and 6. This is really the bread and butter of what we're doing within the community colleges. So as a part of this project, AgTech will build a region-wide industry worker workforce council. That'd be the first piece that we do. Secondly, we'll adopt consistent curricula, equipment, and industry recognized skills throughout the entire Central Valley of the 8 community colleges who are involved in this project. And then last, we'll build 4 regional AgTech workforce innovation centers throughout the region to align with the agricultural clusters and the commodities within those regions. The first piece we'll do is we will build a region-wide industry worker workforce council. We do this already in the community college system, but we do it at a very micro, local level. But what we see as an opportunity within the Central Valley is to build curriculum standards throughout the entire region. And for the first time, all of the community colleges that are involved in this project, from as north as Merced and as south as Vitelli, have come together and agreed to build a region-wide industry workforce council, bringing in our industry partners, as well as incumbent worker voice and farm worker voice, to make sure that what we're training is aligning with current job needs, as well as future technology and advancements within the industry. In addition to that, this will allow us to create work-based learning opportunities, internships, much needed apprenticeships, and teacher externships within the region. And also we'll be able to get a handle on career navigation and support system, not only for our new students, but more importantly for our incumbent workers. If we can get a pulse on a region-wide approach and pipeline for talent training, then we can connect them with the jobs within the industry, and this council will help us do that. The second outcome is to adopt consistent curriculum, equipment, and industry recognized skills and competencies. This project really seeks to develop a first of its kind regional alignment approach with the 8 community colleges who are involved in the California Central Valley. Essentially, what it will do is fully align curricula and delivery systems based on the regional needs, expectations, and standards of the agri-food tech and engineering related industries, ultimately providing industry the much needed resources for talent needs and career pathways. And in just a moment, I'll talk to you about how we're going to actually take it a step further and give them a simulated competency-based approach to this. When it's all said and done, this outcome will ensure that we've adopted consistent curricula throughout the entire region, that we adopted similar equipment and technology that these students are learning on, and that we have simulated opportunities for multi-program and multi-interdisciplinary curriculum. And then finally, what it will allow us to do is be responsive to the 4,700 incumbent workers who are part of this project. We want to be more responsive to the needs of incumbent workers. Initial engagement with incumbent workers has allowed us to get a better sense of the need for more flexibility and more accessibility to our trainings. Some of the components that we're looking at is providing trainings on site, bringing mobile workforce training centers to farm workers or to their places of work, and allow them to get the training they need in between breaks, after work, before work, or maybe integrated as a part of what they're already learning. And then the last piece is to establish 4 AgTech plus workforce innovation centers. And that's what you see on your screen as numbers 5 and 6. Each innovation center, and there is additional projects at West Hills College as well as College of the Sequoias, but they're integrating it into existing brick and mortar facilities. But these innovation centers will be the first of its kind. And if you could think about it for a moment with what we do in allied health. In allied health, we're creating simulated labs where our registered nurses, our CNAs, those going into rad tech, have the opportunity to participate in very simulated like activities that they will experience in the workforce. We do it pretty well in the healthcare industry. This will create a first of its kind in the agricultural industry. We'll develop really a novel approach to training agri-food tech and engineering programs, as well as ensure that research and development have an opportunity to test their technology as transfer solutions. So they're strategically located. The innovation centers will be at 4 different locations within the region, but they're also strategically aligned with various industries and commodities throughout California. So when it's all said and done, Industry Council will be able to inform us on trends in agriculture, innovations, new technology, and make sure at these facilities, our students are learning on the latest approaches. It will also create an intersegmental, interdisciplinary approach within our colleges, allowing students that are learning smart technology production, automation, robotics, transportation of commodities, advanced nutrition, food storage, energy, water systems, and the like, to all begin to work together in a more simulated environment. Among these 3 outcomes, we will prepare graduate-ready students for more than 10,000 plus high-paying jobs across the food systems value chain. And I'll conclude with this and open up for questions. I know that the Hoover Commission is interested in policies. This entire proposal, and if you will, you can take the slide down. This entire proposal is really focused on how we can create a new approach to education. So as you think about policy, we are prepared to implement new approaches using competency-based education, credit for prior learning for incumbent workers, flexible class scheduling, and as we think about policy in the community college system, ensuring that we get the funding we need to be more flexible for incumbent workers as we look at inclusive economic development and upskilling. We also need to make sure that we're aligning resources. Right now, the state of California is looking at and implementing the SERFs. We're doing it through the K-16 collaboratives and the pipeline development. But what's happening in economic development is also a separate conversation. So finding ways to integrate the SERF plans and what we're doing for our regions. And then finally, what we're doing with our innovation centers, from what we can tell, is a first of its kind in agricultural technology. And so anything that can help us with infrastructure support to build and develop more simulated lab opportunities for agricultural students would allow them to be more prepared when they graduate and enter the workforce. So thank you for listening to my 7 to 8 minute summary. I know that was a lot, probably like drinking water out of a fire hose, but we're really excited about the approach that we are taking here, and I look forward to answering questions from anyone on the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if we want to have questions now.
I think Commissioner Cannell has a question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Dr. Vitelli. First of all, thanks for representing the great part of the state in Merced. So love it. So this all sounds great. I know I'm from Stanislaus County, and for many years there were efforts to train people for jobs. The problem was, the training was obsolete. The jobs weren't there for that kind of training. So they finally kind of changed the way they did business to really work with the industry to come up with training for the actual jobs that were there. With what you're doing, have you worked with the industry to identify what they need, or are you looking at the future, trying to predict what they're going to need as you train these 10,000 or 8,400 workers, whatever the number is?
Yeah, no, thank you. Great question. And just a little context, I served as a career technical education dean for several years. My background's in agriculture. University of Florida in ag education. My family's in farming. They're cattle farmers and almond growers. And so not only am I passionate about this professionally, but also what we're doing locally as well within the region. 100% of this is going to be aligned with industry needs. What we have is an opportunity to really sit down for the first time from a region perspective, not just a local perspective, and make sure that what we're doing to train our students is fully aligned with current expectations as well as future. What makes this different is that in CTE, we've always been required to have advisories at the local level. And we should always be updating our curricula to make sure it aligns with what industry needs locally. The Central Valley of California really is a region that needs to have more collaboration and bring in large industry partners, mid-size, small local farmers, incumbent worker voice, and listen to the needs of the region, and then make sure as a region, which is why this makes it unique with all 8 colleges, that we develop curricula that's really going to prepare a workforce that can make a difference regardless of where they work. And also in the context of the commodities that students are going to be entering the workforce in. So already as a part of this project, we've been at the table with industry and asking them these questions. And one of the things we've heard often is in the community college system, you're training welders and you're doing a really good job at training welders. But then when they come to us, we have to teach them in the context of what we need our welders to do. So if you could simulate that to where they understand how their job connects to the logistics and building conveyor belts or programming in the warehouse, then they'll be better prepared. Or you're doing a great job developing those who can do programming, but when they get to us, they don't understand how that connects to the industry. And so if we could simulate that within the community college system, then they'll have a better approach. And what this will allow us to do with the innovation centers is to build that integration. So for Merced College, for example, this innovation lab will have a nut processing portion plant in it. It will have fresh fruits and vegetables processing area, a meats lab, a Made in Merced store where our students can then learn on the agribusiness side for the consumer and end user. We'll begin to integrate our nutrition program. We'll integrate our transportation and truck driving and logistics. And that way they can begin to see how all of these food value chain components connect, all the while our partners in the 4-year are developing new innovations. They're going to test those in our innovation center. So the students learning are going to be prepared when they get out to the GM Polys and to Foster Farms and others, what the newest technology is. So they'll be more prepared. So this is 100% integrated into what industry needs are and will be aligned with industry needs.
Well, and also I think mechanization of agriculture is moving full speed ahead for various reasons, lack of, it's hard to find labor and costs and all that. So I'm very concerned about the existing farm workers as well. And so are those the training will be offered to the existing workers? Because that I can understand new folks coming into it, but the reality is they can go into any industry. It's the folks that are currently in agriculture that really need the training. So how are we reaching out to them to tell them about the training?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's a major component of this project as well. So you may recall I mentioned we're going to train 8,400 workers. One of the metrics, and we don't want this to get lost, it's a very important metric. Half of those workers will be incumbent workers. So 4,700 of those who are trained as a part of this project will be those who are already working in industry. And that approach will be varied. That will be based on what industry tells us they need. And so we may have mobile classrooms that we take out to their places of work. We may use their classrooms. We may create some high flex opportunities for them to do part of it locally close by their workplace, but then some of it online and giving them technology to do so. But we absolutely recognize as technology advances that our incumbent workers are going to need to be upskilled and they're going to need new skills in order to be responsive to the needs in ag. And so we're going to take it to them. We're going to sit down with industry and ask them the best ways to do that. But we're also going to sit down, we've already done this. We're also going to sit down and talk to the incumbent worker and ask them, what are the biggest barriers? Where are you struggling to get the time, the resources? Really, it's an equity issue. What can we do to remove those barriers for you to get the training you need to be responsive to the future of ag within the Central Valley? We've been working also with the California Farm Worker Foundation and strategizing on ways that we can better connect with some of the incumbent workers in that regard as well. So a lot of work has already been done on that front just through some of the counsel that we received. moving forward, that's a big part of the project, and we'll make sure that incumbent workers get the upskill that they need.
In my last just comment, hopefully agriculture itself, the industry gets on board, because these farm workers work very hard. It's very hot. And so to work a full day and then get training in the evening, that's going to be tough. So hopefully the industry itself is behind it and offers the ability for these folks to do it during the workday as well. So thank you.
What, if you don't mind, I'll respond to that in two-prong. One, we've gotten very positive responses from industry so far. They see this coming, and professional development is expensive, and it's why we exist. So helping with that has been well received. But number two, we also recognize that we've got to think about this differently. We can't expect the incumbent worker to sit in a classroom, a 3-unit class, for 54 hours of instruction, which is our current metric. We've got to figure out more creative ways to do this. And we also have to recognize the skills that they bring to the classroom from the beginning. And so that's why competency-based education is a big part of this project, where we're going to give students credit for the competencies and skills they already have. So it's going to be a combination of upskilling them, but also recognizing that they're going to bring competencies and skills into the classroom from day one, and not making them repeat the knowledge and skills they bring. So being able to, in the CTE world, which we haven't done traditionally, test out of some of those competencies and really focus on the areas that they have a skill gap and get them up to speed, so they don't have to go 2 years to be upskilled. So that's a part of it, and we recognize that as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think we now have 2 more witnesses who will testify together, and I don't know, Dr. Vitelli, if you can stay on and if that's possible, given your schedule. If you'd like to, that would be great, and you can respond to any questions jointly with the last 2 witnesses, or not if your schedule needs to take you away. So I'll leave that up to you. But the last 2 witnesses today will be Yeri Oliveras and Genoveva Islas. Yeri Oliveras is Chief Operating Officer for the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation. She was born in Colima, Mexico, and raised in Kerman, California. She studied at CSU Fresno. We've heard a lot about Fresno State today, and obtained her bachelor's degree in business administration. She has assisted with the award of over $2 million in microloans, and has directly assisted over 500 small business entrepreneurs. She will be followed by Genoveva Islas, who is the founder and executive director of Cultiva la Salud, a nonprofit dedicated to creating health equity in the San Joaquin Valley by fostering changes in communities that support healthy eating and active living. Cultiva la Salud efforts also focus on building community leadership so that residents can be more effective in advocating for change by becoming more civically engaged. She has a Bachelor of Science degree also from Fresno State, and a Master of Public Health from Loma Linda University. So we'll start first with Ms. Oliveras, and then Ms. Islas. So Ms. Oliveras.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Yeri Olivares, as you mentioned, here with the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation. And our organization was established 18 years ago with the mission to promote education and self-sufficiency through economic development and help strengthen our community. We established the first bilingual business incubator here in Fresno that is also the first in the Western United States. And we have been focused primarily targeting the Hispanic community throughout the Central San Joaquin Valley. We are the most experienced and longest serving small business technical assistance provider for the Hispanic community and minority groups here in the Central Valley as well, including the rural communities, which is a very essential part of our community and the work that we do. We are committed to fostering entrepreneurship as a means towards economic self-sufficiency, and that is why we have been part of this amazing collaborative. We provide one-on-one technical assistance, we provide business development trainings and workshops, and most importantly, access to affordable capital to help small business entrepreneurs start or expand a business. Like I mentioned, our target audience includes low-income minority entrepreneurs that don't traditionally have access or the education to the tools and the resources necessary to advance economically, and that have been traditionally excluded from having equal access to capacity building resources in their language, that is culturally appropriate and that it's an easy reach. Over the years, the organization has reached over 15,000 small businesses and has assisted with providing over 8 million in capital through other partnerships that we have been able to build. And just recently, we also became a CDFI, a community development financial institution. And in a short period of time, we have been able to provide over 1.2 million in direct lending to small businesses. As the lead for the Siembra Fund, which is a supporting innovative entrepreneurs, minority businesses, restaurateurs, and access food fund for this project. We look to help small businesses in the food business, which we know in our work that it's the fastest growing segment. With all of the businesses that we work with, food is the number one sector in which we're seeing the growth. And it's essential for these individuals to not just have access to the funding, but also to have access to the technical assistance that's necessary to help them formalize the businesses, getting all the licensing and permits that's required for them to be able to have a business that's structured and set up for success. The access to capital is equally important. That's going to help them get businesses started, because that's what's going to help continue creating jobs here in our local economy. We know that here in a region, we need more access to capital. We are known to be a lending desert. There's not enough affordable and flexible funding available for these small businesses that are getting started. We know that there's financial institutions that are exiting markets primarily in the rural communities, and that's very challenging for the small businesses that we work with. And so with this project, we're looking to help bring in capital to these small farmers and local food entrepreneurs so that we can help them start, expand, provide them with all of the tools and resources necessary so that they can become self-sufficient, so that when they are making financial decisions for their families, that we can not just create an economic impact, but also a social impact, that they can build wealth, that they can purchase a home, that they can purchase a new car, that they can provide for their children's education and provide them with a better quality of life. So with that, that's an overview of our Siembra Fund, the work that we're doing. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
So I know we have other people who will testify, but just a quick question. How do you do outreach? How do people know that you are out there?
Our number one way for us to be successful at outreach is door to door. We believe that door to door is the best way when we're in front of individuals and they're able to see that we look like the community that we serve. We speak their language, we look like them. That is when we're able to gain their trust and their confidence. We do the social media, we do the email blasts, we do radio, television, interviews, commercial, we do that type of marketing. But the most effective for us and what we truly believe 100% on is door to door. So we go and knock on the doors for businesses. We go to the rural communities. We're actually in the process right now of establishing satellite hubs so that we can have actual presence in these communities where we're going to be offering the service.
So you just said something which I thought was very interesting, and you mentioned the word trust. Is that a big issue for people to even want to borrow money, microloan or whatever? It's because who is it? How will they have their fingers into my life? So is that a big concern?
It's not a concern, but it's something that we definitely have to address, especially when you're working with minority groups. You have to let them know that you're there to help them. You have to be able to communicate that you are providing them with the assistance, that you're not going to be charging them. One of the things that we focus on when it comes to our lending is to avoid them going to predatory lenders. We want them to know that they have access to resources here that they can access at no cost, that they can rely on us to be able to guide them through the process. And in addition to the financing, we have legal resources we can connect them with, and that helps them, have the trust and the confidence to know that we're actually there to help them and not to, take advantage of them. But it is very important that we gain the community's trust. And being an organization that has been established for over 18 years, we feel that we have gained our community's trust, and a lot of the referrals that we get are word of mouth.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I just have a quick question. So I think lending is a big problem. I know in Stanislaus County, we have a large minority-owned business area, and during the pandemic, they just didn't know how to navigate the system to get all the grants and the PPP and the various things that were out there. It was a big problem. But so now we've tried to establish like a micro lending, same kind of concept, I think. But what are the ranges of the lending that you guys provide for these businesses?
Yeah, our range is from $5,000 to $50,000. Right now, our average is about $25,000 loans. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we knew that there was a specific period in time during the pandemic that businesses were not going to be able to know how to navigate the system on being able to access all of these relief grants. And I got to tell you, here in our business incubator, all of our team came back to the office when everybody was sheltering in place. And when these programs were out, we actually held a drive-through in our parking lot so that businesses could come. You know, they don't know how to scan documents and email them. So we were on the phone with them, filling out the paperwork for them, giving them all of the instructions. We would print the documents, go outside. They were waiting for us in the parking lot, would have them sign, come back inside. And it's very hands-on. And that's very important when we are looking to serve this type of community, that we have to do a lot of hand-holding, and we have to do a lot of help them navigate through this process and this system, because it's part of the education component. And we know that it's going to help them in the long run.
And maybe you talked about this already, and I apologize if you did, but where do you get the money for the loans?
Yeah, so currently we have different sources of funding. So we do have some federal funding. So for example, the reason why we were able to become a city of fine in the first place is because we were able to get an EDA grant with the Economic Development Administration. We currently operate a revolving loan fund in the city of Kalinga. We have also received funding from USDA to target specifically rural communities. We also have some private funds that we have been able to set aside as an organization to help the individuals that are not within that geographic scope or qualify for the funds that we have. And then we also have investments and loan capital that we acquire so that we can lend to our current borrowers.
And is do all these loans, for the most part, they get paid back, I'm assuming, right? So they can also build credit. So some of the bigger institutions in the future can look and say that they've got a track record?
Absolutely. So the main concept that we have with our lending is that we graduate them to the bank. So we provide them with all of our wraparound services. We help them with their credit. We help them with financial education. We help them with accountants, bookkeepers, with legal assistance, marketing, so that as their business is growing, they can have a financial system in place. We know that one of the major things that small businesses have struggles with is their financials. You know, we don't want them keeping their financials in a notebook written down. We want to make sure that they have a financial system in place that's going to benefit them in the long run, so that when they're ready for growth and they're ready to go to a bank, that they are prepared. And so we don't want to continue to lend to the same small business. You know, we'll lend to them once, maybe twice, but after that, we want them to be ready to go straight to a financial institution.
Great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olivares. I think she will be able to stay with us in case there are other questions. And now the last witness for the day is Genoveva Islas. As I mentioned before, she is the founder and executive director of Cultiva la Salud. Ms. Islas.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you. And just a quick correction, my first name is spelled with a G, but it's pronounced like an H. So it's Genoveva. But most people, that's okay. Most people call me Veva. If you do happen to say Viva, just say Veva afterwards, and I'll take it as a compliment. And thank you for your wonderful introduction. I think it was pretty thorough. I would just want to add to what was shared that I am a school board member. So I represent Fresno Unified School District, very proud representing Highlanders in Central Fresno. And I'm also a very proud granddaughter of farmers and ranchers and daughter of farm workers. My mother was in labor and my father was a mechanic. So I'm definitely a child of the Central Valley with all of those influences. And Cultiva la Salud, which means cultivate health, is definitely a nod to being that child of the Valley, because our mission is to try to promote good health, right? Like, we live in the fruit and vegetable bowl of the world, and yet many of our communities do not have access to the fruits and vegetables that are grown here. There was a study done by UCLA of a few counties here in the Valley, and on average, we had 4 to 5 times greater access to processed unhealthy foods than fruits and vegetables. And I think when you go into some of our communities, you can really see the oversaturation of fast food restaurants and liquor stores in comparison to full service grocery stores, right? And so our food landscapes really matter. And I wanted to start with that frame because part of the struggle that we have in the Central Valley and part of the issues that we had in terms of a vulnerability to COVID is the amount of chronic illness that is experienced in our communities. 1 out of every 3 children is overweight or obese. Upwards of 70% of our adult population is overweight or obese. So we really have to focus in on how we make healthy foods the easy choice. Easy in terms of availability. I want our locally grown fruits and vegetables to be ubiquitous, right? And I want them to be affordable. I don't want people to have to struggle and make choices about purchasing unnutritious meals because they can afford it to instead preparing healthier items that should be equally as affordable. So what I have been involved in, and I'm very proud to say, we have been working on a food hub idea, which is that portion of the presentation where you heard Glenda talk about a food hub. Cultiva la Salud began to do some work with mobile vendors, mobile food vendors here in Fresno, and it really led us down a path of learning a lot in terms of the system that they're having to engage in that create a disadvantage and things that need to be altered. So if you can imagine your street vendors, you've met them, they're eloteros, they're paleteros, right? Like they're micro businesses. And we have not done a very good job at making pathways of opportunity for these micro businesses to actually strive and thrive as businesses. Some of the challenges are the simple application to start a business within our cities. If we do not have forms in multiple languages, that creates a barrier. We've had difficulty in navigating from the point of applying for a business license to then getting inspected and permitted at environmental health. So those pathways, the flow of where you start and, once you've completed everything in order to operate legally hasn't been really clearly outlined in a lot of places. And so we've jumped in to help. But we've jumped in to help also with the real interest of trying to influence healthier items being sold by our street vendors. And one of the challenges to that is if a street vendor doesn't have access to a certified community kitchen, he is not going to be complying with a lot of environmental health regulations in order to vend, say, fruits and vegetables or garden salads or things like that that are the healthier things. So part of what we're involved in is the establishment of a certified community kitchen, cocina, here in Fresno, that would create the infrastructure. This food hall idea included that kitchen, as well as what we call the food hall, which would be what some of you would consider like a cafeteria area where there could be kiosks for some of those vendors to sell from. That would be a huge asset in particular because a lot of our vendors are having to contend with the elements, right? Like when it's raining or when it's hot, it's very hard to be a mobile vendor if you're on a bike in foggy weather, whatever the case may be. So the food hall gives us an opportunity for some stability. And the kitchen is this incubator kitchen as well, because the pathways of opportunity we want to create are ensuring that, people are operating with all their license and permits, that they grow their micro business, and that then they may have a pathway to a restaurant or to catering or to a food truck, right? So that there's some evolution and support for them to have those viable pathways. The last portion of the food hall was the aggregation station. And this is, I think for me, the chef's kiss, because what we're doing is we're aggregating from small farmers, small ethnic farmers who often do not have or produce the volume that they could sell to larger markets. So I mentioned I'm a school board member with Fresno Unified School District. We're the third largest school district in the state of California. We provide meals, prepare about 93,000 meals a day. We're serving 76,000 students, right? So it's a lot of food. I recently did spearhead passing a local procurement policy where we're going to be intentional about where we're sourcing our produce. But how magnificent would it be if we aggregated all of these small farmers where they could become a real viable mechanism for us to be able to get that fresh fruit locally grown onto the plates for our student population, right? This is what I mean about changing the food landscapes, both within our communities and our schools, that we should really be creating market and economic opportunity for those local growers to be part of that. And so I guess that's the other really important component when we think about economic development, that we really should be thinking about economic prosperity or shared prosperity as well. What I love about the work that we've been doing and how we're connected to this larger initiative is that it is bringing macro agro business, right, to micro food business together, right? Like where in this kitchen and in this food hub, the vendors could directly purchase some of that locally grown produce that then becomes part of what is being sold in the food hall or what is being sold in the streets through their carts or bike carts, whatever the case may be. I think that when we begin to make those really intentional connections, that we have a lot of collateral benefits in our community, right? Like we know that poverty is a social determinant of health, right? The more that we can help people raise out of poverty, the improved health outcomes that we can also see, the reduction of some of those chronic illnesses. But this also has a lot of impacts in terms of our environment. The shorter distances that our food has to go has very positive impacts to our air quality, to the environment, to our climate. We talked about local investments from purchasing from local farmers and the economic impact there. So there's just a lot of things to celebrate if we're able to do this right. And for me, one of the most important outcomes is that we're promoting good health in our community. We're changing that dynamic of cheap and affordable foods being ubiquitous to really trying to make sure that everybody has access to the bounty of beautiful, great produce that we grow here. And so that's what makes me really excited to be involved in this project. I look forward to decreasing chronic disease rates. I want people to live the full course of their lives in optimal health. You know, that's the hallmark picture of, you know, children growing up with their grandparents, of fathers being able to walk their daughters down the aisle, right? Of being productive in our communities. So that's what's in it for me. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Yes, please.
So again, I want to thank both of you for your testimony today. Very helpful.
Awesome.
Do we lose the connection?
I think they're still, can we, there we go. Why don't we put
super.
them both up, Rachel?
Okay,
There we go.
perfect.
Thank you.
So I just have a quick question for you. I'm going to mispronounce your name, Ms. Isla. Did I get it right? Okay, Isla.
Yeah.
How do you raise your money? What is the source of that? And what is it, if you were to have a magic wand, what would you want the Little Hoover Commission to recommend? What can the state do to support your efforts?
Yeah. So I'm Cultiva la Salud is a 501c3. We are grantees. We work with a lot of philanthropic partners on grants. Lately, we've been doing a lot of COVID response work, right? So we've been front and center at doing mobile vaccine events, doing health education and outreach related to COVID prevention, connecting community residents to resources, whether it's rental assistance or utilities, or even, unfortunately, funeral assistance. So that's what we do. We were lucky to get some CARES Act dollars and some ARPA dollars, but really we function through those grants from philanthropy and government. And if I had one thing, you know, I was hearing one of your commissioners speak early about the efforts that he had done to try to improve access to locally grown produce. I think that local procurement and things like that have, again, a plethora of benefits. It's like a win-win, right? Like when we think about the climate impacts, when we think about the impact to the local economy, to the public health impacts, right? Like all of those things are wonderful. And it's like one of those efforts that has multiplicative benefits that is really useful. I do think that there is a lot that we need to do to rectify the disparity, inequity, and frankly, racism and discrimination that a lot of our street vendors undergo. We do need to help them. They're fathers raising children, mothers, you know, raising families in our community. We want them to be safe. One of the issues because of our lack of attention to them is that there has been a lot of violence and theft committed against mobile street vendors. I'm sure you've seen it and heard it in your own communities. We want to embrace them. We want them to be successful. We want them to contribute to the fabric of our community. I think when we do, we all benefit from that. They are central to changing food landscapes. They can really help us in achieving a lot of public health good by increasing access to healthy food. So I would say, let's be fair. Let's make sure that we're removing barriers that prevent them from operating legally. Let's give them the supports that they need in order to get licensed and permitted. And let's make sure that we're connecting them to this wonderful bounty of produce that we grow so that they're, you know, an integral part of the effort of getting that food into our communities.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your insight and your perspective, which is on the ground. So it really is so important to hear from both of you. You're out there, you're on the ground, you're knocking on doors, and to hear from both of you of your needs and your successes is very informative. And so I thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions? And so let me take this opportunity to express our gratitude to both of you. And wish you continued success in the delivery of important services and the inspiration that you provide to others in the community as role models, right? Coming from backgrounds for many of the people that you serve. I think it's important for them to see what they can become. And you provide that kind of inspiration to others by doing the work that you do and by being members of the community. So again, from the Little Hoover Commission, thank you for giving your time to be a part of our hearing. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the final item today is that we must hold a public comment session. I see no one wishing to make public comment who is in the room. Ashley, do we have, for members of the public, you may raise your hand if you've joined by Zoom. And as we told you at the beginning of the hearing, you can also email us if you've phoned into the meeting, littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. But you must do that immediately and say you wish to make public comment. If you're on Zoom, just use the raise hand function. Ashley, do we have anyone who has indicated they wish to make public comments?
No, we have no request for public comment on Zoom or email.
All right, then I think we can close that, Mr. Chairman, and if you wish, we may adjourn.
Very good. So this meeting is adjourned. Thank you to staff again for exceptional work in putting together the witnesses and for operating what was pretty much a glitch-free hearing. We've all been in Zoom meetings where they weren't as successful as this one has been. So thanks again.